The courtroom was a sea of murmurs as Elon Musk walked into the stark, cold room. Every head turned toward him as if his presence alone commanded attention. The walls, lined with mahogany panels, echoed with the low hum of the air conditioning, but it couldn't drown out the palpable tension hanging in the air. Today wasn't just any ordinary case. Today, one of the most controversial figures of our time stood accused in a courtroom, a place that rarely saw anyone of Musk's stature. At the front, the judge sat in her high-backed chair, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Judge Margaret Stokes was known for her no-nonsense demeanor. Her reputation for being tough, fair, and calculating preceded her. She had presided over cases involving high-profile tech moguls before, but Musk was different. His name alone seemed to carry a weight that made the room feel just a little smaller, a little more claustrophobic. The air was thick, and as Musk made his way to the stand, a few whispered conversations filled the otherwise quiet space. The click of his shoes against the polished floor was the only sound that stood out, echoing through the room. His face, typically a mix of calm and confidence, betrayed a hint of something deeper this time, a subtle vulnerability, something he didn't often let slip. His blue suit, perfectly tailored, felt out of place against the stark, clinical nature of the courtroom. The world outside this room was his domain, but here, in this very moment, he was just another man, standing trial. Judge Stokes looked up at him from behind her glasses, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Mr. Musk, we are all aware of who you are," she said, her voice echoing across the room. "But in this court, we are all equals. Please remember that." Musk gave a slight nod, his lips pressed together in a tight line, as if to hold back the rush of emotions threatening to rise. He had been through many battles in his career, deals, betrayals, lawsuits, but this one felt different. This time, the accusation was personal. And the stakes were higher than they had ever been before. The case against him was one of misrepresentation, of misleading investors and the public regarding the potential of one of his companies. The prosecutor, a man by the name of Daniel Clark, stood ready to make his case. With a reputation for taking down Silicon Valley's giants, Clark wasn't someone Musk took lightly. He had an uncanny ability to get under the skin of his targets, exposing weaknesses in their arguments, their defenses, and most of all, their character. Musk had already braced himself for the onslaught. Clark stood up, adjusting his tie with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," he began, his voice smooth, yet authoritative. "Today, we will show you how Mr. Musk, once hailed as a visionary, used his influence to deceive and mislead those who trusted him. And the result? Billions of dollars lost, lives affected, and a reputation, tarnished beyond repair." Musk sat still, his gaze unwavering. His hands rested on the wooden table in front of him, fingers lightly tapping the surface. He had always thrived under pressure, but today felt different. The weight of the world felt heavier than ever before. The room felt suffocating. As Clark continued his opening statements, Musk's mind drifted back to the events leading up to this trial. The relentless media scrutiny, the court filings, the public outcry, it all seemed like a bad dream. A nightmare he couldn't escape. But this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about everything he had built, everything he had worked for. It was about his companies, his team, his vision for the future. His thoughts were interrupted when Clark's voice cut through the room again. "Mr. Musk's ambition has always been a double-edged sword," Clark said, glancing toward Musk with a pointed look. "On one hand, it drives innovation. On the other, it blinds him to the consequences of his actions. His latest venture, which was touted as revolutionary, led to catastrophic losses. And yet, Mr. Musk stood by and allowed it to happen, all while publicly promising returns that never materialized." Musk felt his chest tighten. The prosecutor had struck a nerve. The accusations were harsh, but they weren't new. The media had painted him as a man too obsessed with his dreams to care about the damage they caused. But there was more to the story. There always was. Judge Stokes interrupted the proceedings, her voice stern. "Mr. Clark, you've made your points. But this trial isn't just about rhetoric. You will need to prove your claims with facts, and facts alone. Let's stick to the evidence." Musk exhaled, the tension in his shoulders loosening for the first time since entering the room. At least the judge seemed impartial. But how long would that last? Would she remain neutral when the evidence turned against him? "Mr. Musk," Judge Stokes continued, turning her attention back to him. "It's your turn. Please present your defense." Musk stood slowly, his eyes meeting those of the judge. For a moment, he thought about the people in the room, his legal team, the spectators, the press. But then his gaze shifted to the one person he truly cared about, the person who had always stood by him, no matter the circumstances. He saw her sitting in the back of the room, her eyes locked on his, her expression unreadable. His ex-wife, Tallulah, had shown up at the last minute, and though their relationship had been strained over the years, her presence here made it all the more real. It was as though the universe had thrown everything at him at once. Taking a deep breath, Musk began. His voice was steady, but there was an underlying intensity. "I stand before you today as a man who has dedicated his life to changing the world," he started, his words carefully chosen. "I've taken risks, yes, but those risks were always calculated. I've made mistakes, but I've learned from them. I am not perfect, but I will never apologize for striving to make the impossible possible." The room was silent, every eye on him. He could feel the weight of their judgment, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he allowed the moment to hang in the air. "I did not mislead anyone," Musk continued, his voice growing stronger. "I've always been transparent about the challenges we face. But the truth is, no one can predict the future. No one could have foreseen the circumstances that led to this situation." The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't interrupt. She was listening, waiting for him to continue. Musk's thoughts flashed to the countless nights spent designing, building, and fighting for a future that was always just out of reach. The investors, the engineers, the press, they all saw his ambition as something to be feared. But they didn't see the hours of work, the sacrifices, the countless times he had questioned himself. He paused before finishing. "I may be many things, but I am not a liar. And I will prove it." The courtroom was still, as if holding its breath. Every word Musk spoke was carefully measured, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt the slightest sense of hope. But little did he know, this trial was only the beginning of a much bigger game. A game where the stakes were higher than he could ever imagine. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't always the billionaire tech mogul the world knew him to be. His story began far from the glitz and glamour of Silicon Valley, in a small town in South Africa. Born to a Canadian mother and a South African father, Musk's early years were marked by a combination of privilege and hardship. His father, Elon Musk, was a brilliant but complicated man, demanding and often cold. His mother, May Musk, was a dietitian and model, always encouraging Elon to pursue his interests, but she had her own struggles, raising Elon and his two siblings as a single mother after her divorce from Errol. Elon's childhood was marked by a deep sense of alienation. He was different. His interests were in computers and technology, and while other kids his age were outside playing sports or hanging out with friends, Elon was reading books on science fiction, philosophy, and engineering. He would spend hours building things, taking them apart, and trying to put them back together. Even then, it was clear that his mind was already racing ahead of everyone else's. He was bullied at school. Kids would taunt him, call him names, and mock him for being the weird kid who spent more time in the library than on the playground. But instead of cowering, Musk retreated into his studies, using his academic success as a shield against the harshness of the world outside. "I was an outsider, even in my own family," Musk later reflected in interviews. I never felt like I fit in. The world seemed to move in ways I couldn't understand. But I knew I had something in me, something I needed to prove. At the age of 17, Elon left South Africa, determined to make his mark on the world. He moved to Canada to attend Queen's University, primarily to avoid being drafted into the South African military, a system he didn't believe in. His decision was strategic. Canada was far away from the turmoil of his home country and had a direct link to the United States, where he saw limitless possibilities. However, Queen's University wasn't where Elon would begin his meteoric rise. After 2 years, he transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned degrees in both physics and economics. It was during these years that Musk's ambitious streak began to show. He became obsessed with the idea of changing the world, and more specifically, making it a better place for humanity. He was determined to make a lasting impact, though his methods were anything but conventional. At the age of 24, Elon moved to California to pursue a PhD at Stanford. But he had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to sit in a classroom and learn theoretical knowledge. Instead, he left after just 2 days, diving headfirst into the world of tech startups. He had no plan but an idea, a vision for the future. He wanted to create something that would change the world. His first venture was Zip2, a software company he co-founded with his brother, Kimball. It was a simple idea at the time, an online city guide that provided business listings and maps. Musk was relentless in his pursuit of perfection, staying up late coding and building. The company eventually sold to Compaq for nearly $300 million in 1999. Musk's share of the sale was $22 million, a fortune for a man in his late 20s. But instead of basking in his newfound wealth, Musk reinvested all of his money into his next ventures. He went on to found X.com, an online payment company that eventually became PayPal. Musk's vision was clear. He wanted to revolutionize the way money was transferred across the globe. PayPal grew rapidly, gaining users and attention. It was sold to eBay for $1.5 billion in stock in 2002, and Musk walked away with $165 million from the sale. At this point, many would have retired, but not Musk. He had bigger dreams. Dreams that would defy the odds and challenge the very limits of human potential. He poured his fortune into 3 projects that would change the world: SpaceX, Tesla, and Solar City. Each was ambitious, each was risky, and each required an immense amount of sacrifice. SpaceX was Musk's dream to make humanity a multiplanetary species. He wanted to make space travel affordable and accessible to everyone. The first years were a blur of near failures, explosions, and crushing disappointments. Musk risked everything. His fortune dwindled, and many questioned whether he was mad. But he refused to give up. And eventually, SpaceX succeeded, with a rocket launch that proved Musk's dream was possible. Then there was Tesla, his electric vehicle company. Musk's goal was to revolutionize the automobile industry. He didn't just want to make electric cars, he wanted to make them desirable. Many industry experts laughed at him, saying it was impossible to make electric vehicles that could rival traditional gasoline-powered cars. But Musk's determination turned the skeptics into believers. Tesla's rise was meteoric, as it produced cars that not only challenged the automotive industry but redefined it. Today, Tesla's Model S, Model 3, and other electric vehicles are seen as some of the most cutting-edge cars in the world. Solar City, Musk's solar energy company, aimed to make renewable energy the norm. It was a natural extension of his vision for a cleaner, more sustainable future. But even with these accomplishments, Musk's path was filled with adversity. The pressure, both personally and professionally, was immense. Every decision he made could either make or break his companies, and Musk was often criticized for taking on more than he could handle. Through it all, Musk's personal life wasn't without its struggles. He had been married twice and had multiple children, but his relationships often seemed strained. The pressure of his work, the weight of his ambitions, and his drive to constantly push the boundaries of what was possible took its toll. It wasn't uncommon for Musk to lose sleep, stay up for days working, or become so engrossed in his projects that he lost touch with those closest to him. His dedication to his work was legendary. He was known to sleep on the floors of his factories, to answer customer emails himself, and to insist on controlling every aspect of his companies. And though his relentless drive earned him praise from many, it also led to criticism. Some said he was too obsessed with perfection, too blind to the realities of business, and too willing to risk everything for a dream. But despite all the ups and downs, Musk's reputation grew. He became a symbol of possibility, of what could be achieved when a single person refused to accept the limitations of the world around them. He was a genius, a visionary, and yet, at times, a man whose ambition seemed too grand for reality. Now, standing in a courtroom, with accusations of misleading investors hanging over his head, Musk's journey was about to take a new turn. The same ambition that had brought him so much success now put him at the center of a legal battle that could unravel everything he had worked for. As he sat in the courtroom, reflecting on his past, Elon Musk couldn't help but wonder, had the cost of his dreams been too high? The courtroom was tense. It was only the third day of the trial, yet the atmosphere felt as though it had been simmering for weeks. Elon Musk sat at the defendant's table, a silent figure in the midst of the growing storm. His legal team was composed of some of the best minds in the field, but the prosecutor, Daniel Clark, was proving to be an unpredictable force in the courtroom. Clark had a reputation. He didn't just deal in facts, he dug into the personal lives of his targets, bringing to light their flaws, their mistakes, and the hidden corners of their past. In some ways, his methods were as sharp as a blade, able to cut through even the thickest of defenses. He was meticulous and knew how to exploit the smallest detail to his advantage. Musk had been warned about Clark's tactics, but it was another thing to experience them firsthand. "You said in an interview, Mr. Musk," Clark began, standing with a slight smirk on his face, "that you believed the future of humanity lies in Mars. That you were willing to risk everything to make that vision a reality. And yet, here we are today, with millions of dollars lost, and investors left holding empty promises. Tell me, Mr. Musk, how do you reconcile your dreams of a multiplanetary society with the failure of your promises to those who believed in you?" Musk's jaw tightened as Clark's words hit home. The trial wasn't just about one project or one business venture. It was about everything he had built, the vision, the ambition, the dream of something far greater than himself. Musk had always believed that humanity needed to push beyond the boundaries of Earth. SpaceX was a passion project, one that could define humanity's future. But now, Clark was turning that very passion into a weapon. Judge Stokes watched the exchange with cold precision, her eyes flicking back and forth between the two men. The trial had already seen its share of verbal sparring, but now it seemed to be entering dangerous territory. The personal stakes were no longer just about the money, they were about Musk's reputation, his character, and his vision for the future. Musk took a deep breath before replying. "I've never promised anyone that this would be easy. Space exploration is an incredible challenge, but it's also the future. We can't afford to wait for others to catch up. I put everything I had into SpaceX because I believe in the mission. Yes, we've faced setbacks, but setbacks are part of the process. If you want to change the world, you can't avoid failure, you have to learn from it." Clark scoffed. "Failure, Mr. Musk, is one thing. But what do you say to the investors who trusted you? What about the hundreds of employees who staked their futures on your vision? How do you explain the financial losses that your companies have suffered? If you're such a visionary, why is it that you constantly need to raise more money just to stay afloat?" The room grew silent. Musk's mind raced, but he kept his composure. He had been in tight spots before, but this was different. He wasn't just defending a company, he was defending his entire philosophy. The very idea that his ambition, his relentless drive, could be twisted into a weakness was something Musk hadn't prepared for. "I never asked anyone to blindly follow me," Musk countered, his voice steady. I asked for investors and employees to believe in the long-term vision. Innovation is never smooth. It's messy. But we are making progress. Look at the rockets we've launched. Look at the electric cars on the road. Look at the energy solutions we're developing. It's all part of a bigger picture. Clark's smile grew wider, but it was cold, predatory. Ah, yes. The bigger picture. But what happens when that bigger picture starts to crumble? What happens when people begin to see you as nothing more than a man with big ideas and no follow-through? Musk felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The stakes were higher than he had realized. Clark wasn't just trying to win this case, he was trying to destroy everything Musk had worked for. And there were moments when Musk wasn't sure if he could outmaneuver the prosecutor this time. You're entitled to your opinion, Musk replied, his tone sharper now. But the future isn't built by people who are afraid to take risks. I'm not here to make everyone happy, I'm here to change the world. Judge Stokes raised her hand, silencing the room. Mr. Clark, I've heard enough. Let's stick to the facts, please. Her voice was firm, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was no stranger to high-profile trials, but the personal nature of this one was starting to make her question her initial impartiality. Clark nodded, taking his seat with a glance at Musk. Of course, Your Honor. I'll let the facts speak for themselves. Musk felt the weight of the moment. It was clear that Clark was using his own words, his own beliefs, against him, and it was working. The jury was watching, and their opinions were being shaped by every word that came out of their mouths. Later that evening, in the dimly lit conference room of his legal team, Musk sat back, his mind reeling. He couldn't shake the feeling that the tide had shifted. He knew the stakes, but he had never felt this exposed, this vulnerable. His thoughts weren't just on the case, they were on the broader implications of the trial. What would happen to his companies if this went south? What would happen to his legacy? A knock on the door broke his train of thought. It was his lead attorney, Maria, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been by his side for years. Elon, Maria said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. We need to talk. Musk didn't respond immediately, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as he processed the weight of her words. I know. This trial, it's going to be tough. Maria took a seat across from him, her expression hardening. Clark isn't just going after your companies. He's going after you. He's trying to paint you as someone who doesn't understand the real-world consequences of his actions. You're not just fighting for your companies right now, you're fighting for your reputation. And that's what's at risk here. Musk nodded slowly. I know. But I won't back down. I can't. Maria's eyes softened just a touch. I understand. But this isn't just about being right. You need to control the narrative. Don't let them turn you into the villain. Elon's gaze hardened. I didn't come here to play it safe. I came here to change things. If they want to make me the villain, so be it. But I will fight for what I believe in. Maria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Then you need to be ready. This is only the beginning. You have to be prepared for what's coming next. Musk's heart beat a little faster. I'm ready. Let's do this. As he sat back in his chair, a chill ran down his spine. The game was on. And no matter what, Musk knew this battle was far from over. The days that followed in court were relentless. Daniel Clark's attacks grew more personal, and the pressure mounted on Elon Musk like the force of a rocket preparing to launch. But Musk, as he always did, kept his focus on the bigger picture. He knew he was being dragged through the mud, but he also knew the only way out was forward. If he showed weakness, it would be over. This trial wasn't just a legal battle, it was a test of his very resolve, his entire life's work, and the future of the industries he had poured his soul into. As the days went by, the media buzz surrounding the trial only intensified. Headlines screamed about the Musk meltdown, speculating whether the tech mogul was losing his edge. The public was divided. Some believed in Musk's vision, some saw him as a reckless entrepreneur who couldn't handle the consequences of his own ambitions. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric, charged with tension. Every word, every gesture, every moment seemed to matter more than ever. As much as Musk's legal team tried to stay ahead, Clark had a way of making even the smallest details feel monumental. He was like a surgeon, dissecting every part of Musk's life, turning it over and over in front of the jury. It was the second week of the trial when Clark decided to make his most shocking move yet. On a particularly tense afternoon, Clark stood before the court with a series of exhibits, texts, emails, and even tweets that Musk had posted over the years. The prosecutor's voice rang out, dripping with disdain. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit these texts and social media posts as evidence. These are from the defendant himself, tweets that contradict his previous testimony. Musk's own words show a man who is not only reckless but seems to have no regard for the truth when it serves his interests. In fact, it's clear that Mr. Musk has manipulated information to suit his narrative." Musk's legal team immediately objected, but Clark was relentless. He read aloud Musk's now infamous tweet from 2018, funding secured, taking Tesla private at $420 a share. The courtroom buzzed with the familiar echoes of the tweet that had rocked the stock market and led to regulatory investigations. Clark didn't stop there. He brought up other posts, tweets and emails in which Musk had made bold, sweeping statements about SpaceX and Tesla, often promising results that had not materialized when expected. As the prosecutor rattled off the examples, the tension in the room thickened. Musk sat stoically, his eyes narrowed, but inside, a storm was brewing. This was a critical moment. These social media posts, these seemingly casual comments, had the potential to unravel everything. The jury would surely see him as someone who had overpromised and underdelivered. But Musk wasn't about to fold. He had been through too much, fought too hard to back down now. He knew the truth. His companies had delivered on their promises in ways that had been ignored by the media and the public. It wasn't about whether everything had gone perfectly according to plan, it was about the bigger vision. It was about the future. But how could he explain that to the jury? After the day's proceedings wrapped up, Musk sat in his private office, running his fingers through his hair. The weight of the situation felt suffocating. He couldn't afford to lose this trial. Not just for his companies, but for his entire life's work. If he didn't win here, the ripple effect would destroy everything, his legacy, his vision, the companies that were changing the world. Maria, his lead attorney, was the first to enter the room. She had a grim expression on her face. "Elon," she said quietly, "Clark's got us in a bind. These tweets, these posts, they're exactly what he wants to use against us. We need to find a way to turn this around. Fast." Musk stood, pacing across the room. His mind was whirling, trying to connect the dots. He could feel the pressure, but he had been in situations like this before. When the odds were stacked against him, that's when he performed best. He had made a career out of turning impossible odds into something bigger, something meaningful. "I know," Musk replied, his voice low but determined. "But what if they're missing the point? What if they're so focused on the details that they can't see the bigger picture?" Maria raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Elon's words, his tweets, they're part of the journey," Musk continued. "Yeah, we hit bumps, we made mistakes. But look at where we are now, look at SpaceX. The Falcon Heavy. The Mars program. People said we couldn't even get a rocket off the ground. Look at Tesla, electric cars that outperform gas guzzlers. We're on the verge of changing the entire energy sector." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "Okay, so you want to tell the jury the truth, the whole truth. But you also have to make them believe in that vision. In you." Musk paused, his mind clicking into place. "Exactly. I don't just want to defend myself, I want to make them understand what we've built, what we're still building. If they can't see that, then this whole thing is pointless. Maria smiled, the first glimmer of optimism in her expression. That's the Musk I know. All right, let's get to work. We'll prepare a defense that shows not just the mistakes but the vision behind them. The next morning, Musk's team was ready. They had come up with a strategy that would shift the narrative. Instead of being on the defensive, Musk would take control of the courtroom and show the jury the heart of his journey, the trials, the setbacks, the risks, and how they were all part of creating something bigger than himself. Elon Musk took the stand the next day with an unwavering confidence. He knew this was his chance to speak directly to the jury, to tell them his story. His voice was calm but firm as he addressed the court. I'm not here to claim that everything we've done has been perfect, Musk began, making eye contact with the jury. We've made mistakes. We've had failures. But here's the thing, those failures were never the end. They were the beginning. And every failure, every misstep, has led us closer to something incredible. The courtroom fell silent as Musk's words reverberated throughout the space. For the first time in the trial, the jury seemed to lean in, captivated by the passion in Musk's voice. He continued, explaining his philosophy, how, in his mind, achieving greatness required pushing the boundaries of possibility, even if it meant falling short along the way. He didn't shy away from his mistakes, he embraced them as part of the learning process. I'm here today not because everything has been easy or flawless, but because we've built something that has the potential to change the world. We've put everything on the line for that vision, Musk said, his tone sincere. And that vision is worth fighting for. As he spoke, something shifted in the room. The jury, who had been bombarded with technicalities and legal jargon, now saw Musk as more than just a businessman. They saw a man who had given everything to make his dreams a reality. They saw someone who had been knocked down more times than they could count, but always got back up. Musk wasn't just a defendant in a courtroom, he was a visionary on a mission. As the day wrapped up, Maria leaned over to Musk, her voice filled with quiet pride. That was, exactly what we needed. Musk allowed himself a small, rare smile. Let's just hope it's enough. The following days in court were a whirlwind. The momentum that Elon Musk had started to build in his defense was palpable, but so was the pressure. The jury, still on the edge of their seats, had watched him speak with passion, but the prosecutor, Daniel Clark, wasn't about to back down. If anything, he was more determined than ever to unravel Musk's carefully crafted narrative. Clark had already sunk his teeth into the social media posts and texts Musk had made, but now, something far more dangerous was coming. Something that would shake the courtroom to its core. It came without warning, a bombshell. The day started like any other. The courtroom was filled with reporters, attorneys, and spectators. Musk sat at the defendant's table, his expression calm but focused. His legal team had prepped him well, and for the first time since the trial began, he felt like he was regaining control. It wasn't just about defending his company anymore, it was about showing the world that innovation, ambition, and vision could not be easily dismissed. But then, around midday, Daniel Clark stood up with a thick folder in his hand. His voice was cold and calculated. Your Honor, Clark began, I would like to submit a new piece of evidence for the court's consideration. It's been brought to my attention that Mr. Musk was involved in an off-the-record meeting with several investors in 2019. During this meeting, Musk made several bold claims about the future of Tesla and SpaceX, claims that were never disclosed to the public or to the investors involved in these companies. Musk's heart sank. He had heard whispers about this meeting, but he hadn't anticipated it would be brought up in court. The meeting in question had been a private dinner with a handful of influential venture capitalists, and the details of that conversation had never been made public. It wasn't about promises, it was about Musk's unguarded enthusiasm, his vision for the future. But if those words were taken out of context, they could easily be twisted into evidence of deception. Clark continued, flipping open the folder and pulling out documents. This meeting took place in an exclusive location, and during it, Mr. Musk told the investors that SpaceX's Mars mission would be ready for launch within 5 years. He also guaranteed them that Tesla would be the undisputed leader in the electric vehicle market within the next decade, citing several undisclosed technologies that would revolutionize the industry. The room fell silent. Musk's hands clenched into fists under the table. His mind raced, trying to recall every detail of that night. It had been a moment of excitement, of vision, a conversation with people who shared his enthusiasm for the future. But to hear it presented this way, as though he had made empty promises in order to secure funding, felt like a gut punch. The prosecutor wasn't finished. "And here's the kicker, Your Honor," Clark said, pulling out another document. "These claims, these projections, were never disclosed to the public or to the investors at large. They were private statements, made to a select few. So, while Mr. Musk has repeatedly told the public that he was always transparent, we now know that behind closed doors, he was making assurances that he couldn't, and didn't, deliver on." The courtroom was buzzing with whispers. Musk could feel the eyes of the jury on him, but he refused to break his composure. This was bad, really bad. If the jury believed that he had misled investors and the public, it would be the final nail in the coffin for his defense. Maria, his lead attorney, stood up immediately. "Your Honor, we object. These are private conversations, not meant to be taken out of context or used as evidence in this manner. Mr. Musk did not offer guarantees, he shared his vision, which is entirely different. This is an attempt to distort the nature of a casual conversation." Clark smirked. "Your Honor, I believe the evidence speaks for itself." The judge looked over the documents, her face impassive. "I will allow the evidence to be entered into the record for now," Judge Stokes said, her voice cool but firm. "But I caution both sides to keep the scope of this discussion within reasonable limits." Musk's stomach twisted into a knot. He could feel the walls closing in. This wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was a battlefield where every word, every statement, was being dissected and used against him. After the break, it was his turn to speak. Musk stood up, taking a deep breath as he walked to the witness stand. He could feel his palms sweating as he took the oath, but he wouldn't let his nerves get the best of him. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment where he could tell his side of the story. "Mr. Musk," Clark began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "during that dinner meeting in 2019, you made it very clear to those investors that the Mars mission was just around the corner, didn't you? You told them that Tesla would dominate the electric vehicle market in no time." Musk met his gaze steadily. "What I told them was that we had a vision for the future, a very ambitious vision. I made it clear that there were many unknowns, that things could change, and that we were working towards something groundbreaking. But I didn't make any guarantees. I don't operate that way." Clark raised an eyebrow. "So, you're telling us that you weren't offering assurances that investors would make money, that Tesla and SpaceX would be on top of the world within a few years?" "No," Musk replied calmly. "What I said was that we had the potential to change everything. We were taking risks, but we were confident in our direction. But no, I didn't guarantee anything." Clark leaned in, his voice low and menacing. "Isn't it true, Mr. Musk, that by saying things like that, you manipulated those investors into believing in something that didn't exist yet?" Musk's gaze didn't waver. "No. I believed in it then, and I still do now. We've made incredible progress, and yes, we've faced setbacks. But everything we've done has been leading us toward that future. And I'll keep pushing for it. I'm not going to apologize for that vision." The courtroom was eerily quiet as Musk's words hung in the air. It was the most personal he had ever been in the trial. He had always prided himself on his honesty and his commitment to his work, but here, in this moment, his passion became his weapon. He didn't back down. And then it happened. Judge Stokes raised her hand, silencing the room. Enough, Mr. Clark, she said sharply. I believe we've heard enough on this matter. Let's move on. Clark was visibly frustrated, but he didn't argue. Instead, he sat down, glaring at Musk from across the room. Musk remained standing, his heart pounding in his chest. The words he had spoken were out there now, no turning back. The jury would decide if they believed him, if they understood the true nature of his vision. It was no longer about defending a company, it was about defending the very essence of who he was. Maria walked over to him as he stepped down from the stand, her expression softened but still serious. That was, exactly what needed to be said. Musk nodded slowly. I hope it's enough. The emotional weight of the day lingered as Musk left the courtroom that afternoon. He had faced his demons head-on, but he knew that the journey wasn't over. The trial wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future, the vision he had dedicated his life to. And as he stared out the window of his office, the weight of the moment settling in, Musk couldn't help but wonder, would the jury see it his way? Would they understand? Elon Musk sat in his office late into the night, his thoughts racing. The events of the trial had left him emotionally drained, but he knew that he couldn't afford to let his guard down. The emotional climax had passed, but the real battle was far from over. Every detail mattered now. Every word spoken in that courtroom could tip the scales in either direction. Musk had never been one to dwell on the past, but the weight of what was at stake now felt heavier than ever. If he lost this trial, the consequences would stretch far beyond his reputation. It could jeopardize the future of Tesla, SpaceX, and all the companies he had poured his heart into. The stakes were no longer just about defending his business practices, it was about defending his legacy. But as the night deepened and the city outside grew quiet, something unexpected happened. The door to his office opened, and in walked someone he hadn't expected to see. It was Steve, his old friend and former SpaceX colleague. Steve was someone who had worked alongside Musk from the very beginning, one of the few who truly understood what Musk was trying to achieve. He was a brilliant engineer, a rare kind of visionary, but one who had stepped back from the limelight long ago. Musk hadn't seen him in years, not since Steve had moved on to other ventures. Elon, Steve said with a faint smile, closing the door behind him. I figured it was time to pay you a visit. Musk blinked in surprise, standing up from his desk. Steve? What are you doing here? I didn't expect. I know, Steve interrupted, but you need help, and I can't stand by and watch you go down without doing something about it. The trial, it's all over the news. I've been following it closely. Musk was taken aback, unsure of what to say. Steve's presence in his office felt like a blast from the past, a time when things seemed simpler, when they had both been working toward the impossible, believing that SpaceX could revolutionize space exploration and that Tesla could change the world of electric vehicles. But everything had changed since then. The media attention, the public scrutiny, the endless legal battles, it felt like a weight Musk couldn't carry alone. Steve took a seat across from Musk. I'm not here to judge, Elon, he said softly. But I know how this can go, and I want to help. The truth is, I know the company better than anyone. I've seen what it's capable of. And I know you've never made any promises you couldn't keep. Musk looked at his old friend, the familiar sense of camaraderie and shared history bringing a sense of relief he hadn't realized he needed. He'd been fighting this battle alone for so long that the prospect of having someone he trusted by his side felt like a lifeline. Steve, I appreciate it, but this is complicated. Clark is digging into things I can't control, and every move I make just seems to make things worse. If they don't understand the vision, I don't know how to get through to them. Steve leaned forward, his eyes focused on Musk's. That's the thing, Elon. This trial isn't just about words. It's about trust. It's about showing the jury the truth of what you've built, not the mistakes, not the projections that didn't pan out exactly as you hoped, but the reality of what's been achieved. And the reality is that you've done the impossible. You've made electric cars cool, you've launched rockets into space, and you've set humanity on a path toward Mars. Musk felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Steve's words weren't just encouragement, they were a reminder of the core purpose that had driven him all these years. But could he really get the jury to see that? Could he make them believe in the bigger picture? Steve continued, I've got something that might help. A piece of evidence that could turn the tide in your favor. I've been working with some old contacts at SpaceX, and I found something that could shift the narrative. Musk's eyes narrowed, his interest peaked. What are you talking about? Steve pulled out a thick envelope from his bag and slid it across the table to Musk. Inside were documents, official reports, engineering data, and a series of internal communications from SpaceX's earliest days. Musk scanned through the papers quickly. His eyes widened as he processed the information. These are from the early days of SpaceX, Musk said, his voice low. But what's so special about them? Steve nodded. These reports show the real trajectory of SpaceX's progress, back when you were told that the Mars mission was impossible, that reusable rockets couldn't work. They show that, even in those early years, you were already thinking ahead. You were already laying the groundwork for everything we've accomplished today. Musk leaned in, his mind racing as he took in the details. These were not just old reports, they were a roadmap of SpaceX's success, a testament to the long-term vision Musk had always insisted on, even when the world doubted him. This could be exactly what he needed to show the jury that his work wasn't about empty promises. It was about actual progress toward a larger goal. This, Musk murmured. This could change everything. Steve smiled, but his expression remained serious. It's not a silver bullet, Elon. But it's the truth. The story of SpaceX, of what you've built, has always been about more than just profits and timelines. It's about human progress. And this evidence could show that, from the very beginning, you've been committed to a future that's bigger than any one failure. Musk felt a surge of gratitude, mixed with something else, a renewed sense of determination. Steve was right. This trial wasn't just about defending numbers or projections. It was about showing the jury the truth of who he was and what he had fought for. I can't thank you enough, Steve, Musk said, his voice filled with sincerity. I don't know what I would have done without you. Steve stood up, his face serious but supportive. You don't need to thank me. I've always believed in what you're doing, Elon. And I always will. Now, let's make sure the jury sees it too. The next day, in court, Musk's legal team presented the documents Steve had brought them. They showed the inner workings of SpaceX from its inception, highlighting the early challenges, the iterative development of technology, and the breakthroughs that had set the stage for the company's success. It wasn't just a defense, it was a declaration of what Musk had always known, that even when the odds were against him, he was laying the foundation for something monumental. Clark tried to dismiss the new evidence as irrelevant, but the judge allowed it, recognizing that it was a critical part of Musk's broader vision. As the jury reviewed the documents, something began to shift in the atmosphere of the courtroom. The narrative was no longer just about Musk's past mistakes, it was about the journey, the setbacks, and the triumphs that had led to the creation of companies that were changing the world. As the session adjourned for the day, Musk felt a cautious sense of hope rising within him. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt as though he had a fighting chance. The following day brought a heavier atmosphere to the courtroom than ever before. The weight of the trial had already begun to wear down on everyone involved, but it was clear that the battle was far from over. The testimony, the new evidence, and Musk's impassioned defense had all played a part in shifting the scales in his favor. But Clark wasn't done. He still had one card left to play, a personal card. And it was about to land with devastating force. Musk was sitting at the defense table, reviewing his notes when he felt the weight of Clark's gaze. The prosecutor had been playing a game of patience, letting the tension build. Musk could see it in Clark's eyes. There was something more coming. Something that was going to hit harder than anything they had seen so far. His gut tightened, a sense of unease settling over him. Something told him today wasn't going to be easy. Clark stood up from his seat, his expression cold, but there was a flicker of triumph behind his eyes. "Your Honor," Clark said, his voice carrying the same sharpness it always did, "I'd like to present a piece of evidence that I believe will put to rest any further claims that Mr. Musk has been transparent in his dealings with the public. It's a matter that goes beyond Tesla and SpaceX. It's a personal issue, one that shows Mr. Musk's lack of accountability." The courtroom went silent. Musk felt a pang of unease. A personal issue? What on earth was Clark about to do? Clark looked toward the judge, who nodded for him to continue. With a quiet nod of his own, Clark pulled out a set of photographs, handing them to the bailiff to pass around. The photos were immediately passed to the jury, and Musk's heart stopped. They weren't business photos. These were photos of him, personal, private photos taken years ago, images that were deeply intimate, showing moments from his life that Musk had kept well hidden from public view. The images were of Musk with a woman, one he hadn't spoken about in years. A woman from his past, someone he had once been romantically involved with but who had since become a distant memory. Her name was Claire, and she had been a part of his life long before the fame, before the fortune, before the entire world began scrutinizing his every move. Clark allowed the silence to linger before speaking again, his tone cutting through the tension. "These photographs, Your Honor, were taken several years ago, when Mr. Musk was supposedly focused on his groundbreaking ventures. In these pictures, we can see a man not dedicated to his companies, but instead indulging in personal relationships, neglecting his commitments to his work and to those who depended on him." Musk felt the heat rise in his face. He had tried to bury his past with Claire, not because he was ashamed of it, but because it was a part of his life that no longer fit the narrative he had worked so hard to build. Claire had been important to him, but in the end, their relationship had fallen apart, just as many things in his life had. That was the price of ambition, he thought. The more you chased your dreams, the more you lost along the way. And this relationship had been one of those sacrifices. But Clark wasn't done. Not only did Mr. Musk's relationship with Claire show a lack of focus on his work, but there were several conversations between them that were, to put it bluntly, concerning. Claire repeatedly warned Musk about his priorities, telling him that his obsession with SpaceX and Tesla would eventually cause irreparable damage to his personal life. Yet, Mr. Musk continued down the same path, ignoring the very warnings that could have kept him from alienating those closest to him. Musk's chest tightened as he listened to Clark's words. It was as if his personal life, the part of him that had been the most vulnerable, was being stripped away in front of everyone. The photos, the messages between him and Claire, it all felt like a betrayal of his very essence. Everything he had worked for, every relationship he had sacrificed for his vision, was now being used against him. He could feel his palms begin to sweat. He could see the jury's reactions, the disbelief, the judgment in their eyes. His past was being turned into a weapon, and he had no choice but to endure it. Clark continued, almost savoring the moment. "This isn't just a case of Mr. Musk being distracted, Your Honor. This is a clear pattern of behavior that goes beyond negligence. It shows a fundamental lack of responsibility. A man who is willing to neglect personal relationships, and by extension, the people who depend on him professionally, is not someone to be trusted." Musk felt his throat tighten. He wanted to stand up and shout, to scream that his personal life had nothing to do with his companies or his work. But he knew better. He couldn't let his emotions take over, not now. The courtroom was silent, and all eyes were on him. His reputation, his entire life's work, was on trial, and the truth of his past was now exposed for all to see. His defense team had already begun preparing their counter-argument, but Musk felt a deep pang of vulnerability. He had worked so hard to keep his personal life out of the public eye. Now, everything, his sacrifices, his relationships, his past mistakes, was on display, for the world to scrutinize. Maria, his lead attorney, stood up as quickly as she could, interrupting Clark. "Objection, Your Honor," she said, her voice firm. "This evidence is irrelevant. The defendant's personal relationships, his past, have nothing to do with the case at hand. We are here to discuss Tesla and SpaceX, nothing else." Judge Stokes paused, considering the objection. "Sustained," she said finally, her tone stern. "This line of questioning is not permitted. We will focus on the issues at hand." But Clark was relentless. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the pattern of behavior displayed in these photos is not just about relationships, it's about the mindset of the defendant. We need to understand whether Musk's actions, both personal and professional, have ever truly been in the best interests of the companies he controls." The judge raised her hand, silencing Clark. "We will not discuss personal matters any further. Let's move on." Clark reluctantly returned to his seat, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted, and the jury had seen something deeply personal about Musk, a side of him that wasn't about tech, ambition, or progress. It was about a man, a human being, struggling with the same things everyone else did. As the day ended and the court adjourned, Musk found himself feeling both defeated and strangely empowered. The revelation about Claire, the invasion of his private life, had cut deep. But it also reminded him of the truth that he had always known: success, no matter how groundbreaking, often came with a price. Later that evening, as he sat alone in his office, staring at the city lights outside, Musk couldn't help but reflect on his past. He had been through so much: failure, loss, rejection, but he had always come out the other side stronger. This trial, this challenge, would be no different. He would prove them all wrong. He always did. And as he looked down at his desk, the papers Steve had brought him sat quietly in front of him. There was still hope. There was still a chance to turn this around. But he needed to be ready, because the next blow was coming. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the trial entered its final stretch. The air was thick with anticipation, each day drawing them closer to a resolution, and yet, Musk knew the hardest part of the trial was still ahead of him. The damage from Clark's personal revelations had been done, there was no denying it. The jury had seen a side of him they hadn't expected, not the businessman, the innovator, but the flawed, human Elon Musk who struggled with relationships and emotional baggage. The last few days had felt like a blur. Each witness brought new revelations, new attacks, new doubts cast on his integrity. Yet, through it all, he had maintained a calm exterior, holding fast to the idea that his work, his vision, would ultimately prove his worth. But today was different. Today, the stakes were higher than ever. Musk sat at the defense table, feeling the weight of the room pressing down on him. The judge had already warned everyone that closing arguments would begin soon. His legal team had already prepared their final statements, but Musk knew that the most important thing would be what he said, not what anyone else said. If there was any hope left of turning this around, it would come from him. He needed to do something bold, something that would not only defend his actions but also his vision. He had to show the jury who he really was, not just a man with flaws, but a man who had changed the world. As the session began, Maria, his lead attorney, stood up to give the first closing argument. Her words were measured and precise, her voice confident, as she recapped the key points: the innovations Musk had pioneered, the challenges he had overcome, and the progress his companies had made, despite all odds. She emphasized the importance of focusing on Musk's long-term vision, his work for the betterment of humanity, his role in advancing technology, and his unwavering commitment to solving some of the world's most pressing problems. Musk watched as Maria spoke. She was excellent, as always. But he knew, deep down, that the jury wasn't listening to just the facts anymore. They were listening to him. They were trying to figure out who he was, what kind of man he was, and whether he could be trusted with the companies he had built. Maria concluded her speech with a final plea. Elon Musk has done more for humanity than most people could even imagine. He has taken risks, made sacrifices, and faced insurmountable obstacles. But through it all, he has never given up. We ask that you remember this in your deliberations, and that you see Elon Musk for the man he truly is, a visionary who has changed the world. The courtroom was silent as Maria took her seat, her argument hanging in the air. Musk could feel the eyes of the jury on him, all waiting for his moment. The weight of their gaze felt like an entire universe pressing down on him. This was it. The moment of truth. He stood up, his legs feeling unsteady for the briefest moment before he gathered his resolve. As he walked to the center of the courtroom, he took a deep breath, feeling the rush of emotions flooding his chest. His voice was steady when he spoke, but there was a raw intensity in his eyes that could not be hidden. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice calm but unwavering. "You've heard the arguments. You've seen the evidence. You've seen the photos, the business reports, the testimonies, and the accusations. And now, I'm going to ask you to see something that hasn't been shown to you yet. I want you to see me." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. There was no script, no prepared speech. This was raw. This was real. He was speaking directly from his heart. "I am not perfect. I've made mistakes. I've sacrificed things that I wish I hadn't. But everything I've done, every failure, every mistake, has been in service of something greater. I didn't build Tesla or SpaceX for myself. I built them because I believe in the future. I believe that the world needs a future where we can drive electric cars without polluting the air, where we can send humans to Mars and explore the stars. I believe that if we don't push the limits of what's possible, then we'll never get anywhere." He could feel the emotion rising in his chest, but he pressed on. "Yes, I've made sacrifices in my personal life. And yes, I've hurt people along the way. But if I had to choose between the future of humanity and my own comfort, my own relationships, I would do it again in a heartbeat. I've given everything to these companies because I believe in what we're doing. I believe that what we're building is bigger than any one person." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. The jury sat there, rapt with attention. Musk could see the doubt slowly fading from their faces, replaced by something else. Something that looked like understanding. "But it's not just about the companies or the technology," Musk continued. "It's about the people who are a part of this journey with me. It's about the engineers at SpaceX who've worked countless hours to make space travel possible. It's about the people at Tesla who have dedicated their lives to creating a sustainable future. It's about the millions of people who are driving Teslas today, knowing that they're part of something that will change the world. I didn't build this alone. None of us did." He looked toward the jury, his voice dropping to a quiet intensity. "I'm not asking you to excuse my mistakes. I'm asking you to understand my intentions. I'm asking you to see the bigger picture, the one that I've been fighting for. The future that's possible if we don't give up, if we keep pushing, if we keep believing." Musk took a breath, steadying himself. This was the moment. There was no turning back now. "I am Elon Musk," he said, his eyes never leaving the jury. "And I will keep fighting for that future. Because that's who I am. And that's who I will always be." He turned and walked back to his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. The words were out, and now it was up to them. The jury. The ones who would decide his fate. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence in the courtroom. The judge was the first to speak, her voice cutting through the tension. "Thank you, Mr. Musk. You may take your seat." As Musk sat down, he could feel the weight of the moment lifting, if only just slightly. He had said what needed to be said. Now, all he could do was wait. The closing arguments were over. The jury would deliberate. And his fate, his legacy, was in their hands. The courtroom felt almost suffocating. The air was thick with uncertainty, the silence hanging over everyone like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. Musk sat in his seat, his hands resting on the defense table, his mind racing with thoughts of the closing arguments, the photographs, the testimonies, the raw emotions that had been exposed. He had given everything in that final moment, poured his heart out to the jury, showing them the man behind the headlines, the billionaire, the innovator. But now, all he could do was wait. It had been a long day, and the jury had already gone into deliberation. The clock ticked on, each passing second feeling like an eternity. Musk had never been one to shy away from challenges, but this moment, the moment that would determine everything he had worked for, was different. This was beyond business, beyond ambition. This was his life. His legacy. As he sat there, his eyes wandered across the courtroom. He could see his team, their faces taut with concern, their eyes focused on the door where the jury would eventually reappear. Maria, his lead attorney, was sitting beside him, trying to keep her composure, but even she couldn't hide the nervous tension in her body. Steve, his closest advisor, stood by the wall, his arms crossed, lost in thought. Even the opposing side, Clark and his team, seemed unnervingly calm, but Musk knew they were feeling the same pressure. This was a battle that had consumed them all for months. But for Musk, it was more than just a fight, it was a defining moment in his life. He glanced at the clock again. It was getting late. The deliberations had been going on for hours, and Musk felt the weight of the uncertainty pressing down on him. He knew there was a chance, he knew it was possible that the jury would see past the attacks, past the personal revelations, and recognize the truth of what he had built. But what if they didn't? What if all of it, the work, the sacrifices, the vision, wasn't enough? His mind began to race through the possibilities. What would happen to Tesla, to SpaceX, to everything he had worked for? Would he lose it all? Would the companies crumble without his leadership, without his drive? Or worse yet, would the people who depended on him be left in the wake of his failure? Suddenly, the door to the jury room creaked open, and Musk's heart skipped a beat. The foreman of the jury, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, stepped into the courtroom, followed by the rest of the jury members. Musk sat up straighter, his eyes locked on the foreman. The room went completely still. The judge, Judge Stokes, stood up, her voice commanding the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreman nodded. "We have, Your Honor." The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Musk's chest tightened as he braced himself for what was to come. This was it. The moment that would determine everything. "Please read the verdict," Judge Stokes said. The foreman walked to the bench and handed the clerk the slip of paper with the verdict on it. The clerk stood, holding the paper in her hands, her gaze sweeping the room before she finally read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty of all charges." For a moment, Musk didn't hear anything. The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended in time. Not guilty. His mind struggled to process what he had just heard. It felt like a dream, like the weight of the past months was being lifted from his shoulders in an instant. And then it hit him. The overwhelming flood of relief, of gratitude, of disbelief. He had won. He was free. A wave of emotion washed over him. He stood up slowly, his hands shaking as he looked around the courtroom. His legal team erupted into quiet celebrations, exchanging glances and nods, while Steve gave him a firm handshake, his face breaking into a smile. Musk didn't know what to say. He had spent so much time preparing for the worst, for the possibility of losing everything. But now that it was over, he was at a loss for words. His heart was still racing, his mind still trying to catch up with the reality of what had just happened. The jury filed out of the courtroom, their expressions a mix of relief and exhaustion. Musk watched them leave, their faces blurred in his mind. He didn't want to focus on them, he wanted to focus on the future, on what was next. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Judge Stokes stood up, her gavel in hand. "The court is adjourned," she said, her voice firm. "You are free to go, Mr. Musk." Musk nodded, his throat tight. He turned to Maria, who gave him a look of congratulations and relief. "You did it, Elon," she said softly, her voice warm with admiration. "We did it." Steve stepped forward, giving Musk a hearty clap on the back. "That was one hell of a fight," he said. "You should be proud. You handled that like a pro." As he walked out of the courtroom, the cool evening air hit his face, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he took a deep, steadying breath. He had survived. He had won. But now, he had a bigger mission ahead. One that couldn't be stopped by anything, legal battles, personal struggles, or public scrutiny. He would keep building, keep innovating, keep pushing forward. The future was still there for the taking, and nothing, not even the trials of the past, could hold him back. The press conference was a blur of flashing cameras, urgent questions, and reporters eager to get a soundbite. As Elon Musk stepped up to the podium, he could feel the weight of the moment. The courtroom battle was over, and the jury's verdict was final. He was free. But in a world where every moment seemed to be dissected and judged by the public, freedom didn't necessarily mean peace. "Mr. Musk, how do you feel about the verdict?" one reporter shouted, the camera lens trained on him. The room fell silent. Musk had always been someone who thrived under pressure, who was unafraid of controversy. But this moment felt different. It wasn't just the victory that mattered, it was what came next. He had faced personal demons, public scrutiny, and intense legal challenges, and now that he had emerged victorious, the real work lay ahead. The courtroom had been just the beginning. Elon's eyes scanned the room as another reporter raised a hand. "Do you think this trial has changed the way people perceive you, especially your leadership and business practices?" Musk paused, the question hanging in the air. He had been asked similar questions countless times before, but today, they felt weightier. He wasn't just defending his companies anymore, he was defending himself. "I don't really care how people perceive me," he finally said, his voice steady. "What I care about is making a difference. What I care about is creating something that lasts." Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, Boring Company, all of them are focused on solving some of the world's biggest problems. I'll continue to do that, regardless of how people feel about me personally. The reporters exchanged glances, sensing that this wasn't the typical Elon Musk response. There was something more grounded in his words now. Something that carried the weight of what he had just been through. Another reporter stepped forward, eyes sharp and probing. "You've been known for your bold ambitions, but now that this trial is behind you, do you plan to change your approach? Will we see a more restrained Musk moving forward?" The question hit harder than he expected. Elon thought about it for a moment. The past few years had been a whirlwind of ambitious projects, public battles, and high stakes. Every decision had been made in pursuit of a grander vision, often at the cost of personal relationships and public image. But was it all worth it? "I don't know about restrained," he said with a slight chuckle, the tension in the room easing for a moment. "But I will say this, I've learned a lot. About myself, about the people I work with, and about what truly matters. I've always believed in pushing the limits, but there's something to be said for finding balance, too." There was a slight shift in the room, as if the reporters were seeing a new side of Musk, one that wasn't all about the next big idea, the next moon landing, or the next billion-dollar deal. It was a side that had been tempered by the fire of recent trials, both in the courtroom and in his personal life. "I'm not perfect," he continued, his voice quieter now, but still resolute. "But I'm trying to get better every day. I'm going to keep fighting for the future. But I'm also going to work harder to be there for the people who matter most." The questions continued to pour in, but Musk knew the press conference had taken on a different tone. The story was no longer just about the trial, it was about what came next, what kind of leader he would become after all the battles he had fought. As the last of the reporters finished asking their questions, Elon stepped away from the podium, his mind already racing. There was so much work to do. The trial was over, but the challenges hadn't disappeared. If anything, they had only intensified. There was still a global energy crisis to solve, a Mars colony to establish, and a future to build. And now, with the weight of the trial lifted from his shoulders, Elon felt the full force of his responsibility. He walked out of the conference room, his legal team and advisors trailing behind him. He felt a sense of urgency building inside him, a drive that had always been there, but now felt sharper than ever. "Where are we on the Mars mission timeline?" Elon asked, his voice carrying the same intensity it always had when he spoke about his vision for humanity's future. "We're on track, but we're facing some supply chain delays due to the global situation," his chief of operations, Julia, responded quickly. "We might need to push back a few months." Elon nodded, but his mind was already spinning. Delays were something he couldn't afford, not when everything he had built was pointing toward that goal. He had always known that there would be obstacles, but he had never let them stop him before. "We can't afford to push back," he said, his voice firm. "I want a strategy to mitigate these delays, and I want it on my desk by tomorrow morning. Let's make it happen." As the team filed out of the room, Elon's thoughts lingered on what had just happened, on the trial, on the media circus, and on the future that was now in his hands. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace, not because the battle was over, but because he finally understood that the real fight wasn't against the critics or the courtroom. The real fight was within himself. In the past, he had been driven by a need to prove something, to prove that he was more than just the face of a successful company. But now, there was a deeper purpose. He wasn't just building companies or launching rockets, he was building a legacy. One that would outlast him. As the day wound down, Elon found himself standing alone in his office, looking out over the city skyline. The lights below flickered like stars, reminding him of what lay ahead. The world was full of challenges, full of uncertainty, and full of doubt. But it was also full of possibility. And that, he thought, was what mattered most. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next few days after the press conference were a whirlwind of activity, but Elon Musk couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The verdict was behind him, and for the first time in months, he had the freedom to focus entirely on the future, to pour himself into his companies and his vision without the looming cloud of the trial hanging over him. But as he sat in his office at Tesla's headquarters in Palo Alto, the weight of his responsibilities felt heavier than ever. His team had been pushing forward with product development, and SpaceX had made impressive strides toward the next phase of the Mars mission, but there was a part of him that couldn't ignore the personal cost of the journey he'd been on. The phone buzzed on his desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Maria, his lead attorney. He opened it quickly. "Maria, Elon, we need to talk. There are a few things that came up regarding the media fallout from the trial. We may have some additional PR challenges to address." Musk sighed, rubbing his temples. He'd known this was coming. The public perception of him had always been a double-edged sword. On one hand, people admired his ambition and his achievements. But on the other hand, there were those who criticized him relentlessly, calling him reckless, arrogant, and detached. The trial had only intensified those views. But now, in the wake of the victory, there was something else, a new narrative forming in the media. It wasn't just about his legal battles anymore, it was about the man behind the companies. And for the first time, the personal stakes seemed as high as the professional ones. As Musk typed a quick reply to Maria, telling her he'd be in touch, his thoughts drifted back to the trial. He had put everything on the line, exposed the rawest parts of himself. But even now, he couldn't escape the fact that the very nature of his success, his relentless drive, his focus on the endgame, had come at a cost. His relationships had suffered. He'd alienated some of the people who mattered most to him. And even though the trial had ended in his favor, he knew that the scars it had left would linger. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Steve, his trusted advisor, and the only person who seemed to have the courage to challenge him directly when needed. "Elon, we need to talk about the fallout from the trial," Steve said, walking in without waiting for a response. "Maria's right. The press is already starting to spin this into something it isn't." Musk raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "They're calling you a comeback kid, a victor in the courtroom," Steve said, sitting down across from him. "But the narrative is getting more complicated. Some outlets are saying you're still hiding behind the success of your companies to avoid the real issues. They're talking about your personal life, your relationships, and how all of this plays into the bigger picture of your leadership. It's not just business anymore, Elon. They're digging into your character." Musk leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of Steve's words sink in. He had always known that being in the public eye meant facing constant scrutiny, but he had never expected it to be this relentless. The world wasn't just interested in his ideas anymore, they were interested in who he was as a person, flaws and all. "And what do you suggest?" Musk asked, his tone flat but curious. "We need to control the narrative," Steve said, his voice calm but firm. "You've always been great at handling business crises, but this is different. This is about your image, your legacy. If we don't address the personal aspects now, it could damage everything you've worked for. You need to show the world who you really are, not just the billionaire CEO, but the person behind it all." Musk nodded slowly. He knew Steve was right. He had spent so much of his life building companies, conquering frontiers, and pushing the limits of what was possible. But in the process, he had neglected the very thing that had made it all possible, the human connections that grounded him. It was time to make a decision. Would he continue to prioritize the quest for progress at all costs, or would he try to repair the relationships that had been fractured along the way? "I know," Musk said quietly, his voice filled with a rare vulnerability. "But how do I do that? How do I show the world who I really am after everything that's happened?" Steve leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You start by being honest. About your past. About your mistakes. About the things you regret. You don't have to be perfect, Elon. You just have to be real. People will respond to that." Musk didn't speak for a moment, his mind racing. He had never been one to open up about his personal life. His ambitions had always been his shield, his work his armor. But Steve was right. If he wanted to move forward, if he wanted to build something lasting, something that could truly change the world, he couldn't keep hiding behind the facade of success. "I'll do it," Musk said finally, his voice firm. "But I'll need your help. We need to shape this narrative carefully. It's not just about my story, it's about the future I'm building, and the people I'm building it for." Steve smiled. "That's the Elon I know. Let's make it happen." The conversation shifted, and they began brainstorming ways to publicly address the personal aspects of Musk's journey. The press had already latched onto certain aspects of his personal life, the ups and downs of his relationships, the controversies that had followed him, and the emotional toll the trial had taken. But Musk was determined to take control of the narrative. It was time to shift the focus from the past to the future. Later that day, Musk called a meeting with his executive team. He had always been someone who relied on his instincts and vision, but this time, he was asking for more than just their expertise in business. He was asking for their support in a much more personal way. The room was quiet as his team absorbed the weight of his words. This wasn't just about the future of Tesla or SpaceX. This was about Elon Musk himself. "I'm ready to take the next step," Musk continued, his voice steady. "I've faced the scrutiny, the personal battles. But now, I'm ready to lead in a way that reflects who I am, and who we all are as a team." His team nodded in unison, and for the first time in a long while, Musk felt a sense of clarity. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he was no longer just fighting to win battles. He was fighting to make sure that the legacy he left behind was one worth remembering. The morning after his executive meeting, Elon Musk sat in his office, staring at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Palo Alto skyline. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow across the city. It was a new day, but the weight of the task ahead still pressed heavily on his shoulders. His plan to reshape his image was ambitious, but it wasn't going to be easy. The media had already painted him as a genius, a visionary, but also as an arrogant, eccentric billionaire with little regard for the people in his life. The trial had only fueled that narrative, and now, if he wanted to prove that he was more than just the sum of his success, he would have to confront those perceptions head-on. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Musk called out. Steve entered the room, holding a tablet in his hand. "Elon, I've got the preliminary strategy for the PR campaign. We've got the talking points, media outreach, and a few interviews lined up. But there's one thing we need to address before we move forward." Musk glanced up from the window. "What's that?" "It's the personal stuff," Steve said, sitting down across from him. "The press is already asking for details about your personal life, your relationships, the things you've been through. They want answers. You can't keep avoiding it." Musk felt a tightening in his chest. This was the part he dreaded, the part where he had to face the reality of his own flaws and failures, not just in the eyes of the public, but also in the eyes of the people who mattered most to him. "I know," Musk said quietly. "But I'm not sure I'm ready to open that part of my life up to the world. The business side, I can do. But the personal stuff, that's harder." Steve leaned forward, his tone more serious. "Elon, people don't just want to know about your companies anymore. They want to understand the person behind them, the person who's been through so much. It's not about perfection, it's about honesty. If you can show the world that you're not just the guy behind Tesla and SpaceX, that you've faced real struggles and come out the other side, you'll gain a lot of respect. But you can't hide from it." Musk ran a hand through his hair. He had always kept his personal life private, guarded it like a fortress. It wasn't just about protecting his own image, it was about protecting the people he cared about. His relationships had been complicated, and he had made mistakes. Opening up about it felt like exposing his vulnerabilities, but Steve was right. If he wanted people to see the real him, he had to take that risk. "I'm not sure how much I can share," Musk said, his voice filled with hesitation. "Some of this stuff is personal. It's not just about me." Steve nodded. "We'll approach it carefully. We won't air your dirty laundry, but we can give people a glimpse of the human side of Elon Musk, the side that doesn't always get the attention it deserves." Musk took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle on him. He had always been about pushing the boundaries, breaking down walls, and challenging the status quo. But this was different. This was about breaking down the walls he had built around himself. "Okay," Musk said finally, his voice steady. "Let's do it. Let's show people who I really am." Steve smiled. "That's the spirit. We'll craft a narrative that's both authentic and strategic. People need to see that you've learned from your mistakes and that you're still driven by a bigger purpose." The campaign would begin with a few carefully chosen interviews, ones that would allow Musk to speak directly about his personal life, his failures, and the lessons he had learned. He would be honest, but not vulnerable to the point of weakness. It was a delicate balance to strike, but Musk was used to walking the line between boldness and caution. Over the next few days, Musk sat down with trusted journalists and media outlets, opening up about the struggles he had faced both personally and professionally. He spoke about his divorces, his battles with loneliness, and the pressure he felt to live up to the massive expectations placed on him. It wasn't easy, but each interview seemed to bring a sense of clarity. He wasn't just talking about his achievements, he was talking about the journey, the human side of the story. One afternoon, Musk sat down with a prominent tech journalist, Vanessa, who had covered his career extensively. The interview was scheduled to be part of a special segment on innovators and their personal lives. "Mr. Musk, you've built an empire. Tesla is changing the world, and SpaceX is pushing us closer to the stars. But there's also been a lot of personal turmoil along the way. How do you reconcile the man behind the companies with the public persona that's been created?" Musk paused, looking at the reporter. This was the moment he had been preparing for. His voice was calm but raw as he spoke. "I've made mistakes," he began. "I've failed in relationships, and I've hurt people along the way. My ambition has always been my greatest strength, but it's also been my greatest weakness. I've sacrificed a lot, maybe too much. And I'm not proud of that." Vanessa listened carefully, sensing that this was a side of Musk that the public rarely saw. "Do you think that your drive for success has cost you more than you've gained?" Musk shifted in his seat, his eyes clouded with thought. "I don't know. I've always believed in the idea that if you want to change the world, you have to be willing to sacrifice. But I also know now that you can't do it alone. You can't achieve anything meaningful without the support of the people around you. I've learned that the hard way." The interview continued, with Musk speaking candidly about the lessons he had learned, about balancing his ambitions with his personal life, and about how he had come to understand the importance of connection and vulnerability. It wasn't a comfortable conversation, but it was an honest one. As the interview wrapped up, Vanessa gave him a nod of approval. "Thank you for being so open, Mr. Musk. This is a side of you we haven't seen before." Musk smiled faintly. "Maybe it's time the world saw a different side of me." That evening, as Musk reviewed the interview footage, he felt a sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't hiding behind his accomplishments. He was standing in the light, unafraid to be seen as more than just a CEO or a billionaire. He was human, with flaws, regrets, and dreams, just like everyone else. But he also knew that the media would not let up. The next day, the headlines would be filled with his words, some sympathetic, some critical. The real test would be how the public responded to this new version of Elon Musk. The day after the interview aired, the media frenzy was more intense than ever. Musk had expected the headlines to be a mixture of praise and criticism, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer magnitude of the fallout. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages, notifications, and media alerts. As he scrolled through the barrage of headlines, he saw the same words repeated over and over. "Elon Musk opens up about his personal life, the billionaire's dark side, Elon Musk finally gets real, is it too late?" Some outlets were supportive, calling his vulnerability a sign of growth. Others, however, pounced on his admissions of failure, calling it a desperate attempt to salvage a reputation that was already crumbling. His personal life was now front and center, and some of the criticisms were harsher than he had anticipated. They questioned his sincerity, suggesting that his openness was a calculated PR move to avoid further damage. In a rare moment of hesitation, Musk found himself staring at the screen, wondering if he had made a mistake. He had always been used to controlling the narrative, but now, he was letting the world see pieces of him that had never been visible before. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was Maria, his lead attorney. "Maria, Elon, we need to talk. The media's taking your personal revelations and spinning them into something dangerous. The board is concerned about the potential impact on Tesla's stock price. We need to discuss how to manage this." He read the message, feeling the familiar weight of the pressure bearing down on him. His first instinct was to shut down, to retreat into his work, to focus on SpaceX and Tesla, the companies that had always been his escape. But this time, he knew that wasn't an option. The very thing he had been avoiding, the public scrutiny, was here, and it wasn't going away. He picked up the phone and dialed Maria. "Hey, Maria," Musk said, his voice tight. "I know it's a mess out there. I thought being honest would help, but it seems like it's just giving the press more ammunition." Maria's voice came through clearly on the other end. "Elon, it's not just about honesty. You gave them a window into your personal life, and they've turned it into a circus. Some people are sympathetic, but others are questioning your leadership. Tesla's stock is taking a hit, and we're hearing rumblings from investors. Musk sighed. I knew it wouldn't be easy. But I thought I could handle the fallout. I just didn't expect it to come at me from all directions. There's a way through this, Maria said, her tone firm. But we need to tighten the message. You need to show the world that you're not just talking about your personal life to get sympathy, this is part of your evolution. You're still driven by the same mission, and you're still the visionary behind Tesla and SpaceX. I get it, Musk said, his mind already racing. He had always believed that his work would speak for itself, that the companies he built would be enough to keep the public's focus on the future, not the past. But he was learning the hard way that people cared about the man as much as the mission. We'll figure this out, Maria continued. But for now, we need to focus on stabilizing Tesla's position. We can't afford any more negative press. Musk's thoughts turned to Tesla's board. He could already imagine the concerned faces, the whispers behind closed doors. They had always been supportive, but he knew that even his loyal allies had limits. The trial had already tested their patience, and now, this new personal revelation could be the tipping point. As he sat back in his chair, the weight of his decision seemed heavier than ever. He had wanted to show the world that he was more than just a tech mogul, that he was human, capable of growth and introspection. But in doing so, he had exposed himself to an unforgiving public. Could he recover from this? Was the public really ready to accept him as both a visionary and a flawed human being? The next morning, the media circus continued. Headlines shifted from criticism of his personal life to questions about his leadership abilities. Some were even calling for his resignation from Tesla, arguing that his personal baggage was now too much of a distraction. A few stock analysts began to raise doubts, questioning whether Musk's focus on his personal image was detracting from his work at Tesla. In the boardroom, things weren't much better. Musk had already arranged a meeting with key board members to address the growing concerns. He walked into the room, the usual confidence in his stride now tempered by the uncertainty of the situation. The board members were already seated, their faces a mix of concern and skepticism. As Musk took his seat, he could feel the weight of their eyes on him. There was a new tension in the air, something that hadn't been present before. Elon, one of the senior members, Robert, began, his voice cautious. We've been following the media fallout closely. Tesla's stock has dropped significantly, and there's been a lot of negative press surrounding your recent interviews. Some of our largest investors are concerned. Musk nodded, his gaze steady. He had anticipated this conversation. I understand. But I didn't expect things to blow up like this. I thought being transparent about my personal struggles would help people relate to me, but it seems like it's just given the media more fuel. Robert raised an eyebrow. Elon, transparency is one thing, but the company's leadership is the cornerstone of its success. We can't afford to let personal issues cloud the perception of Tesla's direction. Investors are worried. I get it, Musk said, leaning forward. But my vision hasn't changed. Tesla's mission, our mission, has always been to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. That hasn't wavered, and it won't. I'm still the same person who built this company, and I still believe in the future we're creating. There was a long pause in the room. Finally, Jessica, a longtime board member who had always been a vocal supporter of Musk, spoke up. Elon, I think we all know you've been through a lot. And yes, the media is being harsh. But you've always been someone who fights through adversity. If anyone can weather this storm, it's you. But we need to make sure we're all on the same page. The board has to feel confident that you're still fully committed to Tesla and its future. Musk nodded, appreciating her words but feeling the pressure mounting. I'm committed. That hasn't changed. But I also know that the way I've presented myself has affected the company. I need to do more than just show up. I need to prove to all of you, to the investors, and to the world that I'm still the best person to lead Tesla through this next phase. The conversation continued for hours, with the board members offering their advice, their concerns, and their ideas for moving forward. Musk listened carefully, taking notes, understanding that his actions in the coming weeks would be critical. He left the meeting feeling a little more confident, but the storm was far from over. His next steps were crucial. The public perception of him, and Tesla, was in flux, and he would need to act quickly to regain control of the narrative. The days following the boardroom meeting were filled with a relentless barrage of media inquiries, public debates, and stock market fluctuations. Musk knew that in order to regain control of the narrative, he needed more than just a PR campaign. He had to make tangible moves that would prove to the world, and to his own board, that he was still the visionary leader he had always been. The next step was clear: Musk needed to showcase his commitment to Tesla and SpaceX, while also reasserting his role as a driving force behind innovation. It was time to take action, not just talk. It wasn't long before he made his first move. Tesla's annual shareholder meeting was just around the corner. It was a crucial event, a chance to stand in front of investors, employees, and the public and reaffirm Tesla's direction for the future. Musk knew this was a make-or-break moment. The meeting would be the perfect opportunity to address the concerns head-on, put rumors to rest, and show that he was still fully engaged in Tesla's mission. The media, of course, was already buzzing about the event. Analysts and journalists speculated about what Musk would say, how he would handle the mounting pressure. Would he defend his personal life again, or would he double down on his commitment to Tesla's vision? Either way, the world would be watching. The night before the shareholder meeting, Musk sat in his private office, reviewing his speech for the next day. His words needed to strike the perfect balance, honest and reflective, yet strong and determined. He had to show his commitment to Tesla's goals while subtly addressing the media firestorm surrounding his personal life. He glanced over the speech again. It began with a direct acknowledgement of the challenges Tesla had faced, both as a company and as an individual. But it would also highlight the incredible progress Tesla had made, breakthroughs in electric vehicle technology, the acceleration of their renewable energy goals, and the incredible strides SpaceX had made in space exploration. Musk's message was clear: despite personal struggles, Tesla's mission remained steadfast. The speech was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Musk planned a series of public events to showcase Tesla's new innovations, proving that Tesla was still leading the charge in sustainable energy in electric transportation. It wasn't just about showing up at meetings, it was about delivering results. He needed to prove that he was still in control of the company and its vision, and that the personal struggles that had made headlines would not slow him down. The day of the shareholder meeting arrived, and Musk stood backstage, preparing for his moment. His heart raced slightly, a reminder that despite the public's fascination with his personal life, the world's eyes were still fixed on his leadership and the future of Tesla. As the clock struck 10 a.m., the doors to the auditorium opened, and the crowd of investors, employees, and media journalists filled the room. The stage was set. Musk took a deep breath, stepped out onto the stage, and walked to the podium. The room grew quiet as he began to speak, his voice steady but purposeful. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know the last few weeks have been challenging for all of us. Tesla has faced its share of ups and downs, and I have faced my own personal challenges as well. But through all of this, one thing remains unwavering: our mission to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy." He paused, looking out at the audience. The faces were a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and anticipation. Musk could feel the weight of their attention, but he pushed forward. "I've always believed in transparency, and I think it's important that you hear from me directly about the personal struggles I've been through. I won't hide behind corporate jargon or deflect responsibility. I've made mistakes, and I've had to learn and grow from them. But I'm also more committed than ever to Tesla, to SpaceX, and to the future we're creating." The room was silent. Musk continued, carefully choosing his words. While I've faced personal setbacks, I want to remind all of you of the extraordinary work Tesla has accomplished. We've revolutionized the electric vehicle industry. We've made significant strides in battery technology. And we've launched groundbreaking projects, like the Gigafactories, that are positioning Tesla to lead in sustainable energy for years to come. Our mission hasn't wavered, and it won't. He took a moment to let the words sink in, his eyes scanning the room. The shareholders were listening intently now. I believe in Tesla, and I believe in our people, he said. We are not just building cars or rockets. We are building a future. And no matter what personal obstacles I face, I will always fight for that future. The speech continued, highlighting Tesla's recent technological achievements, the expansion of the company's global presence, and the upcoming innovations that would change the way the world thought about transportation and energy. Musk was careful to reiterate his commitment to transparency, leadership, and growth, while emphasizing that the personal struggles he had faced were just part of the story. They didn't define him, they were a part of the journey. The room erupted in applause as Musk finished his speech. The tension that had hung in the air seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of resolve. The shareholders weren't convinced by words alone, they needed to see results. But Musk knew that the real work was only beginning. Later that evening, Musk received a call from Maria. Elon, that speech, it was exactly what you needed to say. It was honest, it was strong, and it reminded people why they believed in you in the first place. Musk nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that lingered in the back of his mind. The media would still be critical, and the pressure wasn't over. But for now, he had taken the first step toward regaining control of his narrative. Thanks, Maria. But now, we need to focus on the next steps. We've got work to do. Over the next few weeks, the media's focus on Musk's personal life began to subside. While some outlets continued to report on his past, the tone began to shift. More and more stories were focused on Tesla's groundbreaking developments and Musk's relentless drive for innovation. His commitment to the company, to SpaceX, and to his mission had become clear, and the public was starting to see the bigger picture. The stock price gradually began to stabilize. Investors who had been worried about Musk's personal struggles started to refocus on Tesla's long-term potential. And while the road to recovery wasn't without its challenges, Musk knew that this was just the beginning. But the journey wasn't over. There was more work to be done. And Musk was determined to prove, once and for all, that he was more than just a billionaire mogul. He was a man on a mission, and nothing was going to stop him from achieving his goals. The dust had begun to settle after the shareholder meeting, and for the first time in weeks, Elon Musk felt a sense of calm. The speech had gone over well, and the media had shifted their focus from his personal life to Tesla's latest advancements. But Musk knew better than to believe the calm would last forever. In his world, there was always something just around the corner, waiting to test his resolve. And sure enough, new challenges soon emerged, challenges that would not be so easily navigated. It all started with a call from Gwen, his lead engineer at SpaceX, late one evening. Elon, Gwen's voice was tight, we've hit a major roadblock with the Starship prototype. It's going to set us back a few months. The testing didn't go as planned, and the engineers are looking for solutions that might involve reworking the entire propulsion system. Musk's stomach churned. Starship was the centerpiece of SpaceX's future. The vehicle was supposed to take humans to Mars and revolutionize space travel, but if the test failures were significant enough, they could delay the mission by years. How serious is it? Musk asked, already calculating the potential fallout in his head. What's the timeline for fixing it? Gwen paused for a moment before answering. It's a major issue with the fuel delivery system. We're looking at a redesign and retesting. It's not just a quick fix, it'll take months, and the team's morale is low. Musk pinched the bridge of his nose. What's the plan to get us back on track? We're still in the initial stages of assessing everything, Gwen replied. But we need you to decide how to move forward with the timeline and the funding. The pressure's on, and we need your guidance more than ever. Musk knew that SpaceX's future hinged on Starship's success. If they couldn't pull this off, the company's reputation would suffer, and so would the dream of interplanetary exploration. "All right," Musk said, his voice steady despite the growing anxiety. "Let's set up a meeting first thing tomorrow. I'll be there to help. We'll figure this out." He ended the call and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. A setback at SpaceX could ripple through all of his ventures: Tesla, the Boring Company, Neuralink. He had always been able to bounce back from challenges before, but this time, it felt different. The weight of his personal life, the media frenzy, and now this technical failure were all colliding. The following day, Musk sat in a conference room with Gwen and the lead engineers. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone was aware of the stakes, but no one seemed to have an immediate solution to the problem. Musk looked around the table, his mind working quickly. "How long do we have before this issue could affect our launch schedule?" he asked, cutting through the silence. "We have a window of about 2 months before we'd miss our next window for testing," Gwen replied. "After that, we'll have to wait for another launch period, which could push us back another year." Musk nodded, his thoughts racing. 2 months wasn't a lot of time. SpaceX had been counting on these test flights to stay ahead of competitors like Blue Origin, who had been making significant progress in their own space exploration programs. The world was watching, and failure was not an option. "I need options," Musk said, his voice calm but firm. "I don't care how long it takes, but we can't afford to be delayed. We need a plan to push forward, no matter the cost." The team spent the next few hours brainstorming possible solutions, but nothing seemed to be the magic fix. Musk had always prided himself on his ability to think outside the box, but this time, he was finding it difficult to come up with a solution that would ensure success without compromising safety or timeline. By the end of the day, there was no clear answer. The engineers were still working through the issue, but it was becoming clear that SpaceX was facing its most significant challenge yet. Musk walked out of the conference room, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. Starship wasn't just a rocket, it was the future of SpaceX, and possibly the future of humanity's venture into space. A delay at this stage could mean more than just a missed opportunity, it could mean losing ground to competitors and disappointing thousands of people who were counting on him to make the impossible possible. Meanwhile, back at Tesla, Musk's attention was also being pulled in different directions. The company was dealing with supply chain disruptions that were affecting vehicle production timelines. A shortage of critical battery materials meant that Tesla couldn't produce enough Model 3s and Model Ys to meet the growing demand. As if that weren't enough, there were whispers that one of his largest competitors was gearing up to release a new electric vehicle that could compete with Tesla's offerings on a level they hadn't anticipated. Musk knew that if Tesla's stock was to stay stable, he needed to address these challenges head-on. Tesla had come a long way, but it was far from invincible. A setback in production or a dip in public confidence could undo all of the progress they had made. He called a meeting with his senior leadership team at Tesla to discuss the supply chain issues and potential solutions. The room was packed with executives, each one looking to Musk for direction. Elon, his CFO, Andrea, began, "We've been tracking the shortages, and they're hitting harder than expected. We need to find a way to secure alternative suppliers for key materials. The market's getting increasingly competitive, and we can't afford to let delays disrupt production." Musk nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. "We can't let this slow us down. I want options for new suppliers, and I want them fast. We'll have to make some tough calls, but we can't sacrifice quality just to meet timelines." Andrea responded, "We also need to make a call about the upcoming vehicle release. The competition's preparing something big, and we can't afford to be left behind." Musk rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the decisions ahead. This wasn't just about production, it was about Tesla's future in an increasingly crowded market. A misstep could cost them everything they'd worked for. By the end of the week, Musk had his hands full. Between managing the crisis at SpaceX, navigating the production delays at Tesla, and dealing with the mounting pressure from the media and the board, it seemed like every moment of his life was consumed by the weight of responsibility. But through all of it, one thing was certain: Musk wasn't ready to give up. He was committed to these challenges, to the companies, to the missions. His own personal demons might have thrown him off balance temporarily, but they hadn't broken him. SpaceX, Tesla, and all his ventures were built on the principle of innovation, of finding solutions where others saw insurmountable problems. And if anyone could find a way out of these challenges, it was Elon Musk. The road ahead was daunting. But Musk had faced adversity before. And he would face it again. The pressure had never been higher. Elon Musk, already known for making bold decisions in his business ventures, was now facing the challenge of his career. The setbacks at SpaceX with the Starship prototype, the supply chain issues at Tesla, and the looming competition all hung over him like a storm cloud threatening to burst at any moment. But Musk wasn't a man to back down from a challenge. In fact, he thrived under pressure. It was time to make some bold moves. The first step was addressing the SpaceX crisis. Musk knew that the delays with Starship would not only affect the company's bottom line but also the public's perception of SpaceX's future. Failure to meet deadlines could set the company back years, and Musk was not prepared to let that happen. He called an emergency meeting with Gwen and the engineering team the morning after the supply chain meeting at Tesla. As he entered the conference room, the tension was palpable. The engineers were already deep in discussion, but when Musk walked in, everything went silent. "We've got to fix this," Musk said immediately, his voice firm. "I know it's a massive issue, but I also know that every problem has a solution. We need to start thinking outside the box here. I want solutions, not more discussions." Gwen nodded. "We've been considering several alternatives. But the redesign we're looking at is complex, and it'll take months to implement properly." Musk looked at her intently. "I know it'll take time, but what's our fastest route to a fix? I need options that can get us back on track, even if it means making some tough decisions." He wasn't just asking for a plan, he was asking for a game-changing solution. After all, Musk had built his reputation on taking risks and pushing the boundaries of technology. He had always been willing to throw conventional wisdom aside when it didn't work, and this time, he would do the same. The team began brainstorming ideas more freely now, pushing their thinking further. Ideas that had been considered too radical were suddenly on the table. From using a different type of fuel to reworking the launch sequence entirely, the engineers started to see possibilities that they hadn't considered before. "Let's expedite the fuel system prototype testing," Musk said decisively, "and if we need to fast-track the entire propulsion system redesign, we do it. No holding back." Gwen hesitated but then spoke up. "Elon, this will be risky. It might compromise the final product, but if we're willing to take that chance, we could meet the next window. It'll be a matter of getting every hand on deck, pulling in every available resource." Musk didn't hesitate for a second. "Do it. I don't want 'risky' to be an excuse. I want it fixed, yesterday." As the team sprang into action, Musk felt a surge of determination. The wheels were in motion. He had made the call, and now it was up to the engineers to execute. The road ahead would be difficult, but Musk had no intention of letting this setback derail SpaceX's progress. Next, Musk turned his attention to Tesla. The issues with the supply chain were equally pressing. Without critical materials for battery production, the company was at risk of missing its delivery goals. Tesla's reputation for innovation and performance was at stake, and Musk couldn't afford to let that slip. He flew out to the Gigafactory in Nevada to meet with Andrea and the team responsible for logistics and production. The facility was buzzing with activity when he arrived, but even with the energy in the air, there was a sense of urgency hanging over the workers. "Elon, the situation is worse than we anticipated," Andrea said, meeting him as he walked into the plant. "We're facing delays in everything from lithium supply to shipping bottlenecks. The competition's new electric vehicle is set to launch soon, and if we don't get these delays sorted, we could lose significant ground." Musk walked with her down the factory floor, his eyes scanning the assembly lines as they passed. Tesla was still growing, still on the cutting edge, but it was clear that the pressure to maintain its lead was intense. "We need to secure additional sources of raw materials," Musk said, thinking aloud. "I want to know what other suppliers we haven't tapped into yet. And we need to ramp up production. If we can't keep up with demand, we'll lose our edge. Make no mistake about it." Andrea nodded. "We're already in talks with some new suppliers. But it's going to take time to get them up to speed." "Time we don't have," Musk replied. "Can we increase our battery production rate by expanding our partnerships? Maybe we should also consider diversifying our product line to hedge against these shortages. If we can make a smaller, more affordable version of the Model Y to reach new markets, it could buy us time until the supply chain catches up." Andrea looked at him, impressed by the strategy. "That could work. We've got to act fast." Musk didn't waste any more time. The following week, he was on the phone with Tesla's partners around the globe, lining up new suppliers, exploring every possible avenue to keep the wheels of production turning. Meanwhile, engineers were working overtime to implement designs for a more affordable Model Y version that could hit the market sooner than expected. Musk was prepared to take every action necessary to keep Tesla at the forefront of the electric vehicle race. But even with these efforts underway, Musk couldn't ignore the pressure of the larger stakes involved. If SpaceX couldn't overcome its Starship crisis, if Tesla couldn't meet its production goals, the media would pounce. His reputation was still fragile, and with so many moving parts, failure in one area could spiral and affect everything he had worked so hard to build. The media, ever the opportunist, had begun to shift its focus back to Musk's personal life again, with articles dissecting his every move. It was a constant battle to keep the public focused on the bigger picture, the companies, the innovations, the future. But Musk had no time for that. He couldn't afford to let the media dictate the terms of his legacy. So, he doubled down. At Tesla, production numbers skyrocketed as the team worked around the clock to meet deadlines. At SpaceX, Starship's redesign began to take shape, and Musk's gamble on the expedited testing paid off. The company was on track to meet the next launch window, and the excitement around the space program reignited. Still, the challenges were far from over. The risks Musk was taking could lead to either monumental success or catastrophic failure. But he was used to that. He thrived in environments of uncertainty. For him, this was just another obstacle to overcome, another opportunity to prove that nothing, not even the impossible, was out of reach. Weeks later, with both SpaceX and Tesla beginning to regain their momentum, Musk finally allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He sat in his office, looking out over the sprawling gigafactory as the sun began to set. This was what it was all about. The constant pressure, the relentless push toward the next big thing, the endless cycle of challenges and triumphs. He had once said that the best way to predict the future was to create it, and that was exactly what he was doing. Every risk he took, every challenge he faced, every bold move he made, it was all part of the journey. And no matter what the world thought of him, no matter how many setbacks he faced, he would keep moving forward. Elon Musk had made it through countless hurdles, overcome numerous obstacles, and faced challenges that would have crushed anyone else. But as he sat in his office late one evening, staring at a screen filled with data, he could feel the tension rising once more. Despite his confidence, despite his relentless optimism, something felt off. A lingering sense of unease hung over him, threatening to destabilize everything he'd worked for. It had been weeks since the critical breakthroughs at both Tesla and SpaceX. SpaceX had finally found a temporary solution to the Starship propulsion issue, and Tesla's new Model Y variant was on track to hit production targets. For all intents and purposes, Musk had steered the ship through the storm. But it wasn't enough. There was more to be done, more risks to take. But the truth was, Musk had begun to feel stretched thin. The constant balancing act between his companies, his personal life, and the relentless media scrutiny was taking its toll. The constant demands were pushing him to the edge, testing his endurance in ways he hadn't expected. The next morning, he was back in action. His first stop was a meeting with the senior management at Tesla, where they were discussing the progress of the new Model Y production line. Andrea was at the front of the room, presenting the numbers. "We're seeing positive signs. The new supply chain partners have started delivering more materials on time. Our next batch of vehicles will hit production targets by next month, but the backlog is still quite substantial," Andrea reported. Musk leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "We need to speed this up. If we're going to compete with the new vehicle coming out from Rivian and Ford, we can't afford to let up. Push for more efficiency across the board. No more delays." Andrea nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "We're on it. But the bottleneck is still in the battery production process. The new supply chains are working, but not fast enough." Musk stood up, pacing around the room. "Then we need to innovate our way out of it. I don't care if it means adding new technologies or finding alternative ways to source materials. Just make it happen. We can't let another competitor gain the upper hand." As Musk left the meeting, his mind raced with thoughts of how to solve the problem. The pressure from Tesla's stockholders was mounting, and with Tesla's market position so fragile, any faltering in production could make headlines for the wrong reasons. He had already pushed his engineers to their limits, and now it felt like they were at their breaking point. But Musk wasn't someone who could ever settle. He knew the stakes. The goal of making electric vehicles the new standard for transportation was still on the horizon, and he wouldn't let anything stand in his way. Later that afternoon, Musk was back in California, meeting with Gwen and the SpaceX team to check on the progress of Starship's redesign. Though the prototype was coming together, he could sense the tension in the room. The engineers were exhausted, but their work was far from over. "Elon, we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot to be done. The fuel system redesign is pushing the limits of what we thought possible," Gwen explained. "If we don't nail this final test, we might be looking at another significant delay. And we need this launch to happen in the next 2 months, or we'll miss the next window." Musk felt the weight of her words. He had already taken risks by pushing the team to work faster, but now it felt like they were skating on thin ice. If the test failed, the timeline would stretch even further, putting everything, SpaceX's reputation, their future funding, the dream of Mars, on the line. "Then we test harder," Musk said, his voice sharp. "We double down on every single aspect. I want a 24/7 operation if we need it. We've been at the edge before, and that's where the magic happens. This is our moment. No excuses." Gwen hesitated for a moment before replying. "Elon, we've already pushed the engineers so hard that morale is at a low. I don't want to risk burnout. If we don't manage the pressure, we could lose our best talent." Musk thought for a moment, realizing the truth in her words. "All right, we'll scale back the hours, but we won't scale back the intensity. We need results, not exhaustion." Later that evening, after hours of meetings, conference calls, and endless discussions about future strategies, Musk finally allowed himself to take a brief break. He sat in his office, gazing out over the city lights. The familiar hum of Tesla's factory in the distance was a reminder of how far he had come, but it also served as a constant reminder of what was at stake. He took a deep breath and thought about the challenges ahead. The space race, the electric vehicle revolution, and the constant battle to stay ahead of the competition. For a moment, it felt like he was drowning in the weight of it all. The stress, the endless pressure, the scrutiny, it was a lot for one person to carry. But then, just as quickly as the thought had come, he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to break. There was too much at stake, too many lives depending on his success, too many people counting on him to change the world. But then, the unthinkable happened. As Musk was about to leave the office to grab a late dinner, his phone rang. It was Andrea from Tesla. "Elon, there's been a significant problem at the Gigafactory," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "We've just received reports that a fire has broken out in one of the production lines. The entire section could be destroyed if we don't act fast." Musk's stomach dropped. This was the last thing he needed. "Are the workers okay?" he asked quickly. "Everyone's been evacuated. But if the fire spreads, we could lose valuable equipment, and the delays will be catastrophic." He didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." Musk arrived at the Gigafactory in record time. Emergency crews were already on the scene, working frantically to contain the blaze. Musk watched as workers rushed to salvage what they could, the stress and chaos palpable in the air. "Elon, we're doing everything we can," Andrea said, meeting him near the fire line. "But we don't know yet how bad the damage is. This could set us back months, if not longer." Musk stood motionless for a moment, surveying the damage. He couldn't let this break him. Not now. Not when so much was on the line. "We'll rebuild," he said, his voice low but determined. "We'll come back stronger than ever." As the flames were finally contained and the damage assessed, Musk felt a mixture of frustration and resolve. Another setback. Another challenge to overcome. But one thing was certain, he would never stop fighting. The fire at the Gigafactory had been contained, but the damage was done. The devastation was severe. It wasn't just the physical damage to the production line, it was the delay in production that would ripple across Tesla's entire manufacturing process. And while the team worked tirelessly to rebuild, Elon Musk's mind raced with the consequences. Could this setback be the breaking point for Tesla? As he walked through the scorched section of the factory, Musk couldn't ignore the haunting sight of the machinery that had once been on the cutting edge of electric vehicle production, now reduced to molten remnants. The charred remains of what was supposed to be a symbol of innovation and progress felt like a personal failure. Andrea met him at the site, her face a mix of exhaustion and determination. "Elon, we're working on securing a temporary solution for the production line. But this is going to take a few weeks. We need to figure out how to keep production up in the meantime without compromising quality." Musk nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The fire had brought everything to a grinding halt, and with the competition from companies like Rivian and Ford intensifying, Tesla couldn't afford more delays. The market wouldn't wait. "We'll make it work," Musk said, though his voice sounded distant. "I want to keep the pace up, even if it means repurposing resources from other areas. Whatever it takes." Andrea gave him a concerned look but didn't argue. "Understood. But you know we'll need additional hands on deck to make this work." Musk glanced around at the devastation, then back at Andrea. "Get the teams together. We need all hands on deck. No one sleeps until this is fixed. Make sure the production lines at other sites are functioning at full capacity to make up for the lost time." The drive to keep moving, to push forward, was ingrained in Musk's very DNA. He had always known that setbacks were part of the game, but this was different. This was more than a minor glitch. This was a crisis that could destroy years of progress if he wasn't careful. He couldn't afford to let his focus slip, even for a moment. That night, as the team continued their work to assess and repair the damage, Musk flew back to SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The stakes at SpaceX were just as high, and the tension there had been building for months. The Starship test flight was on the horizon, and Musk's team was working overtime to ensure it would be ready for the critical launch window. Gwen, looking equally worn out from the grueling pace, greeted him with a tight smile as he entered the control room. "We've finished the final revisions on the Starship's propulsion system, and the test flight is scheduled for tomorrow. It's make or break." Musk ran a hand through his hair. His mind was already swimming in a sea of calculations, contingencies, and worst-case scenarios. He knew what was at stake. If Starship failed, the ripple effect would be felt throughout SpaceX. It would affect funding, investor confidence, and Musk's own vision for the future of space exploration. "We can't afford another failure," Musk said. "Do whatever it takes to make sure everything goes off without a hitch." "I've had the team double-check every system," Gwen replied. "But you know how these things go. There's always something unexpected. We've pushed this design to the limit, and now it's all about execution." Execution, Musk repeated, the word hanging heavy in the air. It was a simple concept, but it was also the most elusive. So many factors were out of his control, and if anything went wrong, it could be catastrophic. The next morning, Musk was back at the SpaceX facility for the test flight. The team had gathered around the launch pad, their faces a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Musk's own heart raced as he watched the massive Starship rocket on the launch pad, ready to test its engines for the first time. If this test failed, it would mean months of redesigns and repairs, another blow that SpaceX couldn't afford. The countdown began, and every second seemed to stretch into eternity. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the countdown reached 0. The engines roared to life. The rocket launched into the sky, sending a trail of fire and smoke behind it. For a moment, it seemed like everything was going according to plan. Musk's chest tightened with hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had finally pulled it off. But then, disaster struck. The rocket jolted mid-flight, and a loud crack echoed over the launch site. The Starship veered off course, the trajectory beginning to waver. For a brief moment, the crowd held its breath as the rocket seemed to stabilize, but then it started to spiral uncontrollably, its engine sputtering. Musk's heart sank. He knew exactly what was happening. The Starship was doomed. "Abort! Abort!" he shouted, but it was too late. The rocket exploded in a fiery burst, the sound deafening, the shockwave knocking him back a few feet. The engineers and technicians rushed to contain the damage, but Musk remained still, his eyes fixed on the smoldering remains of the Starship prototype. There was nothing he could do now but accept the crushing blow. Gwen stood beside him, her face pale. "We've lost it. This was supposed to be the one. It was going to change everything." Musk didn't say anything at first. He just watched the destruction unfold. His mind raced with calculations of what this would mean for SpaceX, for his career, for everything he had worked for. The failure of this test wasn't just a technical failure, it was a personal failure. Every inch of progress felt like it was slipping through his fingers. Then, slowly, he exhaled, his chest tightening. He knew the risks when he embarked on this mission. He had taken on impossible odds his entire life, and yet, he kept pushing. Now, more than ever, he had to push through the failure. "It's not over," Musk said, his voice steady. "We'll rebuild. We've learned more from this failure than we would have from any success." Gwen looked at him, disbelief written on her face. "Elon, this is a huge setback." "I know," Musk replied. "But we can't stop now. We'll go back to the drawing board, and we'll come back even stronger." That night, as Musk sat alone in his office, the weight of the day pressed down on him like a crushing force. He had failed. Twice. Once at Tesla, and once at SpaceX. It felt like everything was falling apart, like the dream he had built over decades was unraveling before his eyes. But in the quiet of the room, he remembered something. He had always been a man who refused to give up. There had been countless failures before, the Model S, the first Falcon 9 rockets, the initial Tesla Roadster. Each failure had only fueled his determination to keep pushing forward. He was at a tipping point. It could go either way, he could let this defeat define him, or he could rise from the ashes once again. Elon Musk had never been one to back down. And he wasn't about to start now. The days following the dual setbacks were nothing short of grueling. Elon Musk had spent every waking moment navigating the aftermath of the fire at Tesla's Gigafactory and the disastrous failure of the Starship test. Each day felt like an uphill battle. Every conversation, every email, and every decision weighed on him like a mountain. For a man who thrived on constant action, the crushing reality of two simultaneous failures left him feeling paralyzed, yet, deep down, he knew he couldn't afford to wallow in defeat. He woke up early on the third morning after the Starship failure. As the sun began to rise over Hawthorne, California, Musk walked into the SpaceX Operations Center. The room was buzzing with activity, though the mood was noticeably somber. His engineers, technicians, and staff were all working tirelessly to assess the wreckage and identify what went wrong. Gwen approached him, her expression neutral but clearly reflecting the stress of the past few days. "Elon," she began, her voice steady but laced with concern. "We've identified the issue with the Starship prototype. The engine malfunction wasn't as catastrophic as we initially thought, but it's still a major setback. We'll need to redesign a portion of the engine's propulsion system, and we'll need more time to test." Musk nodded slowly, processing the information. He knew the drill. This wasn't the first time a prototype had failed, but it was the first time the stakes felt this high. The countdown to Mars was slipping further out of reach. His vision of a self-sustaining colony on the Red Planet, an idea that had driven him for years, felt distant, almost like a mirage. But he couldn't afford to be consumed by doubt. "I don't want excuses. I want solutions," Musk said, his voice firm but calm. "How long will it take to fix this?" "We're looking at a few weeks to get the engine reworked. Another month for full testing before we can do another flight." "It's going to be a tough timeline," Gwen answered. Musk's thoughts swirled. There had been too many close calls already. Too many delays. But failure wasn't an option. Not now. "We'll make it work," Musk said. "Whatever it takes. No more delays. Do what you need to do." Later that day, Musk headed to Tesla's Gigafactory to personally oversee the repairs. The fire had destroyed a significant part of one of the production lines, but the damage could have been worse. There was still hope. He was determined to salvage the situation. As he walked through the factory, surrounded by workers, engineers, and safety personnel, he could feel the tension in the air. Everyone was on edge. The pressure was palpable. Andrea, the operations lead at Tesla, walked up to him as he surveyed the damage. She had been working tirelessly alongside her team to get the production lines back on track. "Elon, we're making good progress. We've secured the rest of the materials we need, and we're on track to repair the damaged sections in record time. But I've got to be honest with you, this is going to stretch us thin," she said. Musk turned to her, his expression unreadable. "We've been stretched thin before. What do we need to do to keep production moving? I don't care how hard it is." Andrea paused for a moment, taking a breath. "We're going to need a lot of resources, extra manpower, a few temporary parts from our other factories, and a full inspection of every step of the process to make sure there are no more weaknesses. But if we move fast, we'll be able to catch up." Musk nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. "Get everyone on board. I want people working 24/7 if we have to. No more mistakes." The hours turned into days as Musk pushed his teams to the brink. His leadership style, known for its intensity and relentless demands, had never been more tested. He knew that while failure wasn't an option, neither was sacrificing the well-being of his employees. Yet, the crushing weight of two near-catastrophic events meant that if he didn't push hard, both Tesla and SpaceX could face financial ruin. That night, as Musk returned to his hotel, he reflected on the series of events that had brought him here. The fire at Tesla's Gigafactory, the failed test flight of Starship, it was all too much for one person to bear. But that was the reality. He had put everything on the line for these companies, for his dream of revolutionizing the automotive industry and sending humanity to Mars. But the weight of the situation was starting to take a toll. Despite his unwavering belief in the future of space exploration and electric vehicles, Musk couldn't shake the feeling that he was reaching his breaking point. The next day, as Musk made his way to Tesla's headquarters, he received a call from a familiar voice, his brother, Kimball. The conversation was brief but direct. "Elon, you've got to take a step back," Kimball said. "You can't do this alone. You're running yourself ragged. The teams are burning out. If you don't take a breather, we'll lose everything you've worked for." Musk frowned, his thoughts clouded by the pressure. "I can't stop now. The stakes are too high. If I take a break, everything falls apart." "You're not a machine, Elon. You can't pour from an empty cup," Kimball replied. "You need to take a breath and let the teams do their jobs. Trust them. You've built this empire with brilliant people. Don't let the pressure blind you." For a long moment, Musk stayed silent. His brother's words resonated deeply with him. He had always been a man of action, a man who thrived on relentless pursuit. But Kimball was right. He had pushed himself to the edge, and now it felt like the edge was pushing back. As the days passed, Musk began to take a step back, just a small one, but it was enough to allow his teams to breathe. He delegated more tasks, trusted his senior management at both Tesla and SpaceX to make decisions without his constant oversight. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to get some rest. It wasn't easy. His mind constantly drifted back to the challenges at hand. But with every small victory, every piece of machinery repaired, every line of code fixed, every minor success at SpaceX, he started to regain his confidence. By the end of the month, both Tesla and SpaceX were back on track. The Gigafactory was up and running again, and the Starship team had made critical strides toward preparing for another test flight. Musk walked out of the SpaceX Operations Center that afternoon, standing outside in the California sun. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself a moment of peace. It wasn't the end of the road, but it was a significant step forward. He had been at rock bottom before, but this time felt different. He had lost, then found his way back. He wasn't just rebuilding his companies, he was rebuilding himself. The pressure had almost broken him, but it hadn't. And now, with the fires behind him, Musk was ready to face the future. Despite the immense progress made in the aftermath of the fires and setbacks, Elon Musk knew that he couldn't just sit back and rest on his laurels. SpaceX's mission to send humanity to Mars wasn't just a far-off dream, it was a race. A race against time, technology, and now, new competitors. The first signs of trouble came in the form of an unexpected press conference held by the CEO of a rival space company, Orbital Innovations. They had announced a breakthrough in their propulsion system that could potentially rival the design SpaceX had spent years perfecting. The media buzzed with speculation. Could this new company threaten SpaceX's dominance in space travel? Musk sat in his office late into the night, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. Orbital Innovations had made a bold claim, one that could potentially derail SpaceX's entire timeline for Mars. The whole idea of sending humans to the Red Planet relied on the ability to get them there, and more importantly, bring them back. The propulsion system was critical, and Orbital Innovations had just made a move that could knock SpaceX off course. He wasn't used to competition like this. Sure, there had been rivals before, Blue Origin, Boeing, but Orbital Innovations was different. They were new, agile, and seemingly capable of fast-track innovations that could disrupt the entire industry. Musk's phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. It was a message from Gwen. "We need to talk. Urgent." He dialed her number immediately. "Gwen," Musk said, his voice sharp. "What's going on?" "I just saw the press conference. Orbital Innovations isn't bluffing. They've got a viable propulsion system, and they're planning to test it in the next 6 months. If they succeed, we're going to have some serious competition in the race to Mars, she said, her voice strained. Musk rubbed his temples. The pressure was building again. How close are we to finalizing our own propulsion system? We're ahead in terms of the design, but it's going to take at least another year to fully test and optimize. And even then, there are risks. Their system could throw off our timeline. We need to move fast. Musk knew this. SpaceX had already been pushing its limits, but this new threat meant that they couldn't afford any delays. Not even one. I want a plan. I want to know what it will take to leap ahead of orbital innovations and secure our lead, Musk said, his voice firm. And I want it yesterday. I'll have the team working on it, Gwen replied. But we need more resources. This could require a major shift in focus. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, late nights, and strategy sessions. Musk had personally overseen every aspect of the new propulsion project, poring over designs, calculations, and timelines. He had learned long ago that the only way to succeed in this industry was to outwork everyone else, something he planned to do once again. At Tesla, the new production lines were running smoothly. The Gigafactory was operational once more, and the engineers were meeting their production targets. Still, Musk couldn't shake the thought of orbital innovations. Their recent success had put everyone on edge, and he knew it was time to push SpaceX's capabilities to the next level. But as the pressure mounted, so did the toll it was taking on him. He'd been on the verge of burnout only a few weeks ago, and now, he was teetering on the edge again. His once clear vision of Mars felt clouded by the constant demands of the present. How could he maintain the pace he needed to stay ahead of the competition? It was a late evening, and Musk was once again alone in his office. The only light in the room was from the glow of his laptop, the walls around him dark and silent. A knock on the door broke his focus. "Come in," Musk called without looking up. Gwen stepped inside, her face etched with fatigue. "Elon, we've made some progress, but it's not enough. Orbital Innovations is moving faster than we anticipated. If they test their propulsion system successfully, they could have a working prototype ready for launch within a year. That would put us at least 2 years behind." Musk looked up, the weight of the words sinking in. 2 years behind. That could mean losing the race to Mars altogether. For someone like him, who had dedicated his life to this vision, failure wasn't an option. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, deep in thought. Then we need to change the game. We need to move faster. If they have a working system, we need to test ours immediately. We'll take every resource, every dollar, and pour it into this. Gwen shook her head, clearly frustrated. We don't have unlimited resources. We can't keep doubling down without risking everything else. I'm not asking for infinite resources. I'm asking for a focused, all-in push. Whatever it takes, we make this happen, Musk replied, his voice resolute. There was a long silence. Gwen looked at him, her eyes tired but determined. I'll get the team together. But you need to be prepared for setbacks. We might not succeed in the timeline you want. I don't want to hear that we can't do it, Musk snapped. We're going to prove them wrong. I'm not backing down now. As the weeks passed, Musk's relentless push began to take its toll on his personal life. The conversations with his family were fewer, and his relationship with Gwen, once steady, began to feel strained. But there was no time to slow down. Not now. Orbital Innovations launched their first successful test of their propulsion system. The media exploded with praise, and investors jumped in, eager to back the promising company. Musk watched the news coverage with a hard expression on his face, but inside, his mind was already racing. We'll get there, he muttered to himself. We always get there. But deep down, he knew that this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The world was watching. The race to Mars was no longer just a personal ambition, it was a battle to secure the future of humanity. And he was determined to win, no matter what. That night, as Musk sat in his office looking at the latest data from SpaceX's propulsion tests, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Kimball. "Elon, don't forget to take a step back. It's not just about the mission, it's about you, too. You can't do this if you're burned out. We all need you." For a moment, Musk hesitated. Kimball's words were hard to ignore. But the fire in his gut was still burning. He wasn't going to stop now. He couldn't. The dream of reaching Mars was too important. He typed a quick reply, "Thanks, Kimball. I've got this. Don't worry." As the days blurred into one another, Musk continued his pursuit, unyielding. But the question remained, how much longer could he keep this up? In the face of the fierce competition from Orbital Innovations, the stakes had never been higher. Could SpaceX recover in time to maintain its lead, or would Musk's unwavering drive push him and his team past their breaking points? The pressure had become unbearable. Elon Musk was used to pushing himself to extremes, but as the weeks went by, it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. SpaceX was moving forward at full throttle, and Tesla's production was in full swing. But something was wrong. The drive that had once fueled him now felt more like a burden than a blessing. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept for more than a few hours. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a conversation with anyone that wasn't about work. The message from his brother, Kimball, still echoed in his mind. "It's not just about the mission, it's about you, too. You can't do this if you're burned out. We all need you." But what did Kimball mean? Musk had always been the one to lead from the front. He had always been the one to fight the hardest, to shoulder the weight of every decision. He wasn't sure how to slow down, how to take a step back. Mars was his dream. Tesla was his vision for the future. He couldn't walk away from it. Not now. But despite the massive strides made by SpaceX and Tesla, there were moments of doubt creeping in. His teams had been working around the clock, but their progress was slow. Orbital Innovations was gaining momentum, and the race to Mars had become more competitive than ever before. The rivalry was no longer just about being the first to Mars, it was about control of the future of space exploration. And Musk could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him, day after day. One morning, Musk found himself at SpaceX's headquarters, staring blankly at a wall of schematics. The propulsion system was almost ready for another round of tests, but something wasn't sitting right with him. The timeline was tight, and even though the engineers were confident, there was a nagging voice in the back of his mind telling him they might not be ready in time to outpace Orbital Innovations. He was pacing the room when Gwen walked in, carrying a large folder filled with technical data. "Elon, we've made progress, but we're still not where we need to be," Gwen said, setting the folder down on the table. "The propulsion system is sound, but the launch vehicle needs more work. If we rush it, we could face serious delays or even worse, a catastrophic failure." Musk stopped pacing and stared at the folder. He could feel his chest tightening. He didn't have time for delays. "I don't care about a few delays," he snapped. "If we don't beat Orbital Innovations, we lose everything. Our entire future is at stake." Gwen met his gaze with a steady expression, but Musk could tell that she was frustrated. "Elon, I get it. I know the stakes. But we need to be strategic. If we push too hard, too fast, we could lose everything. We have one shot at this." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing again. The tension in the room was palpable. His mind raced with options, but none of them seemed like the right choice. The pressure was building, and the walls were closing in on him. "I want to push forward," he said, his voice quieter now. "We've come too far to back down now. Do what needs to be done, Gwen. I'm counting on you." Gwen hesitated, but she nodded. "Okay, we'll push. But we're doing it on our terms, not on the clock. If we're going to win, we need to do it the right way." As the days passed, the intensity only increased. Musk barely slept, relying on the caffeine and adrenaline that had powered him for so many years. But as much as he pushed forward, a part of him felt like he was losing control. At Tesla, things weren't any better. The production lines were back up and running, but the pressure to meet delivery quotas weighed heavily on the company's workers. Elon had always been demanding, but now it felt like he was driving everyone around him to the edge. His leadership style had always been one of intense focus, but lately, it was coming at a cost. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing his grip on everything: his employees, his family, and most importantly, himself. One night, as he was reviewing final reports from Tesla's factories, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from Kimball. "Elon," Kimball's voice came through the line, calm and measured. "I've been hearing things. The workers at Tesla, they're stretched thin. Gwen is telling me that SpaceX is facing the same problem. You're pushing them too hard." Musk's grip on the phone tightened. "I'm doing what needs to be done. We can't afford to fail." "You're not the only one carrying this weight, Elon," Kimball responded. "You're burning out. You're pushing people too hard. What happens when they can't keep up anymore?" Musk exhaled sharply. "I don't have time to slow down, Kimball. If I don't keep pushing, everything I've built will fall apart. You're building a future for humanity, Elon. But if you're not here, there won't be anyone left to see it," Kimball said, his voice growing more insistent. "You need to take care of yourself, or all this, Tesla, SpaceX, everything, it won't matter." The next day, Musk found himself standing in front of a whiteboard in the SpaceX conference room, surrounded by engineers and technicians. They were deep into a meeting about the propulsion system's final adjustments when Elon spoke up, his voice more strained than he intended. "I don't care about the risks. We push forward now," Musk said, his eyes burning with a determination that no one could ignore. The room fell silent for a moment. Gwen, who was sitting near the front, exchanged a look with one of the senior engineers. The tension in the room was palpable. "Elon, we need to be sure," Gwen said quietly. "We need to be smart about this." Musk didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the whiteboard, tracing his fingers along the diagrams and numbers in front of him. His mind was racing, thoughts colliding and crashing in a frantic storm. Deep down, he knew he couldn't keep pushing his people like this. He couldn't keep pushing himself. For the first time in weeks, he felt a heavy sense of exhaustion wash over him. The weight of the world, of his companies, his mission, his dream, felt almost too much to bear. He turned back to face the team, a faint flicker of doubt in his eyes. "We'll test the system, but we'll take the time we need. I've pushed you all too hard." The decision to slow down was one of the hardest Musk had ever made. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that rushing ahead wasn't always the answer. Sometimes, the best way forward was by taking a step back. But as Musk stared out the window of his office that night, he wondered if this was enough. Was it too late to change the course of the race? Could SpaceX still catch up to orbital innovations? And more importantly, could he find the balance between his ambition and his well-being? As the sky darkened over Hawthorne, Musk made a vow to himself: he wouldn't let this burn him out. He couldn't. He had too much to give, to his companies, to the world, and to his own future. But there was no turning back now. The race was on. And he was ready to fight until the very end. The calm after the storm never lasts long. Despite Elon Musk's decision to slow things down, the tension that had been building within SpaceX and Tesla was far from over. The path to Mars had always been difficult, but now, it felt like the hardest road he had ever traveled. It was no longer just about technological advancements, it was about navigating a delicate balance between ambition, people, and the clock ticking relentlessly toward a future Musk wasn't sure he was ready for. The weeks that followed Musk's decision to ease the pressure on his teams were a turning point. Slowly but surely, SpaceX's engineers began to find new solutions to the problems they had been facing. The propulsion system was coming together in ways they hadn't expected. They had all been working so fast, pushing themselves beyond their limits, that they hadn't had time to fully understand the intricacies of the design. Now, with a little space to breathe, they started to make breakthroughs that were once thought impossible. But even as the engineers made progress, Musk couldn't escape the nagging worry at the back of his mind. Orbital Innovations was still in the race. They were pushing forward too, and every time SpaceX took a step forward, it felt like the competition was right on their heels. One evening, Musk was in his office, once again staring at a wall of numbers and schematics. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Gwen. "We're ahead." The test results came back positive. The propulsion system is ready for the next phase. For a moment, Musk just stared at the message. It was the news he had been hoping for, but even then, a part of him couldn't quite believe it. After all the setbacks, all the pressure, all the doubts, was it really possible? He pressed a hand to his forehead, trying to calm the chaos in his mind. He knew he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not now. Not with Orbital Innovations getting closer. The next day, Musk called a meeting with his core team at SpaceX. Gwen, the engineers, and a few key leaders from Tesla were all gathered in the conference room, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. This was it. The moment they'd been working toward for years was finally in reach. "Elon, we've tested the new propulsion system extensively," Gwen began, her voice steady but tired. "We're confident that it's ready. The next step is the launch vehicle. That's the final piece of the puzzle. If we succeed there, we can start testing for the mission to Mars." Musk leaned forward in his chair, his eyes focused on the team. "This is it, then. We've been through hell and back, but we're on the edge of something bigger than any of us could have imagined. The next few weeks will determine everything." Gwen nodded, but there was still a hint of caution in her eyes. "Elon, we've made great strides, but I want to remind you that this isn't over yet. The launch vehicle is just as critical as the propulsion system. We have to make sure everything works together before we even think about a mission to Mars." Musk understood the gravity of her words. But the truth was, they had no more time to waste. If they didn't push forward now, Orbital Innovations might steal the lead. "We'll take it one step at a time," Musk said, his voice calm but resolute. "But we move forward. No more delays." The room went quiet for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Then, one of the engineers spoke up. "Elon, there's something we should talk about. We've been getting reports that Orbital Innovations has a team ready to launch their own mission to the moon within the next year. They've accelerated their timeline. If we don't act fast, they might reach Mars before we do." Musk's jaw tightened. The thought of someone else getting to Mars first was unthinkable. His vision for the future of humanity was on the line, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. "Then we get to work, and we work faster," Musk said firmly. "SpaceX isn't going to be the company that watches from the sidelines. We're going to lead this race." The next several weeks were a blur of intense focus and late nights. The SpaceX team was moving at breakneck speed to complete the final tests on the propulsion system and the launch vehicle. Every day brought new breakthroughs and new challenges. There were moments when the progress seemed overwhelming, when the mountain ahead of them felt too steep to climb. But each time Musk started to lose hope, his team rallied together, pushing forward like they had done so many times before. Musk himself was on edge, more focused than ever. He was rarely seen without a cup of coffee in hand, his mind always racing ahead to the next step. But despite the stress, he could feel the energy within SpaceX. They were on the brink of something monumental. They could all sense it. Then, the day arrived. The first successful test of the combined propulsion system and launch vehicle was scheduled. It would be the moment that determined whether they were ready to begin the final stage of preparation for Mars. The team gathered at SpaceX's launch site, the massive rocket standing tall and gleaming under the morning sun. Musk stood in front of the crowd of engineers, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no room for failure. If this test didn't work, the entire timeline would be in jeopardy. "Elon," Gwen said quietly as she approached him. "This is it. The team has done everything they can. It's in the hands of the technology now." Musk nodded, but the tension in his body was palpable. This was more than just another test. This was their future, their mission to change the course of human history. If they succeeded here, there would be no turning back. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8, 7. Every second felt like an eternity. Musk held his breath, watching the screen that tracked the rocket systems. His hands were clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. 3, 2, 1. The rocket roared to life, and the test began. Musk's heart skipped a beat as he watched the systems engage, the launch vehicle rising into the air. Every minute, every second of this moment would be a defining chapter in SpaceX's history. And then, it happened. The rocket soared. The engines fired perfectly. The propulsion system worked without a hitch. The test was a success. The room erupted into cheers, but Musk stood still, watching the test unfold in front of him. His eyes were fixed on the screen, his face unreadable. He had done it. SpaceX had done it. In the days that followed, the news spread quickly. SpaceX had successfully completed its test, and it was only a matter of time before the mission to Mars would begin. But as Musk stood in front of his team, the adrenaline from the test still coursing through his veins, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey. He had pushed himself and his team harder than ever before. He had faced challenges that seemed insurmountable. But through it all, they had come out on top. He had led them to victory, but it wasn't just his success, it was theirs too. The race to Mars was far from over. But SpaceX was no longer just competing, it was leading the way. And that, Musk realized, was the greatest victory of all. SpaceX just completed its test and is now one step closer to Mars. What do you think the next challenge will be for Elon Musk and his team? Can they keep up their momentum, or will new obstacles emerge? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?